Warning, this podcast contains scenes of explicit nonsense and lore.
Previously on the Resident Evil podcast.
Part of me wonders if, yes, Separate Ways was planned to be a new thing for the PS2, but they made Mikami cut content from the original to sort of implement into it.
And again, I use the TMP a lot in this game. I think perhaps because my aiming isn't so good.
Because all it's referred to is the sample, and you don't have anything of like the dominant or submissive plaga or anything like that, so it's a little bit difficult to understand in retrospect.
Her attacks, he throws a beam at her and she ziplines up to the top of the roots. It's just up on top of the area right beside you. Yeah, the geography magazine.
Jill's there with her finger blasting everything.
Pardon?
The Resident Evil podcast.
Hello and welcome to episode 108 of the Resident Evil podcast, where we look at the T-Virus the same way Marcus did that fateful night surrounded by his leeches. I'm Nick, better known as Neptune, your aquatic T-Virus creation. Let's see who's joining us today. He endures the night to fight those T-Virus creations. It's the Batman.
Hello there.
He's the ultimate T-Virus humanoid creation. It stars Tyrant.
Good evening.
And sadly, well, he's just a T-Virus byproduct. It's Romby.
Aw, hi.
Coming up on today's podcast, it is, as you may have hinted there, a T-Virus special where we're going to be having a deep dive into the classic, the original virus that has graced the Resident Evil series since the very beginning. We're going to be looking at all the variants, the effects of it, and a little bit of history with regards to Umbrella and how the T-Virus project came into existence. We'll be catching up as well with the news and ending with another edition of Neptune's Biohazard Quiz. So let's start with the news. First bit of news, Requiem news. Yes, we are slowly making our way towards the February release date for Resident Evil 9. And since our last podcast, we've had the collector's editions have been announced, as well as, quite surprisingly, Amiibo is coming out on the Switch 2 version. If people know what Amiibos are, you can put a little statuette of something onto the controller and it gives you something. We don't know anything else about it. I'd imagine it's some either additional health, skins, shotgun shells, I don't know, something like that. More excitingly with Requiem, we've got the new controller for Switch 2, the Switch 2 Pro controller. You can pre-order that now. UK people, you can pre-order that at Smith's Toy Shop. I just happened to have a look a moment ago. What I wanted to talk about, though, as part of the news, was the fact that the collector's edition seemingly has the 1998 files. We don't know much about it.
It's the Baker report all over again by the looks of it.
This is what I wanted to really focus on. Are we having... good to have files, absolutely. Are we getting a paywall for lore?
Yes.
Wasn't there some comment about them? It's not going to be a separate feature like the Baker report. They're actually going to be in the game. So you basically have to patch them in.
I think I'd read somewhere that the 1998 files will be peppered through the game to be able to collect, yeah. I don't know how true that is.
So if you don't have the special edition, you're just going to have the normal game. But if your game recognises that you've got the deluxe edition or whatever it is.
Yeah, it'll be similar to like Jill's diary getting patched into RE2. You know, it'll just be DLC unlock code that will then add those files to the game. You remember in Resident Evil 4 Remake, you could actually have DLC treasures, couldn't you? Where it added additional treasure items through the map. This will be a similar mechanic as such.
You're basically paying for the X-Files from the N64 version.
Yeah, that's what it looks like, and it sucks. I agree.
Yeah, this doesn't look good. This is not good optics, is it?
Well, this is the thing. They made the Baker report so essential to the sort of long-term lore. I don't know whether letters from 1998 will be as essential, but who knows what's in it, you know, until we can see them before. At the end of the day, it's moot, because at the end of the day, it's just going to be text and fan sites and everything like that, and people will distribute these files all over social media within, moments of the game going live anyway. So it's all it's a weird thing to put behind a paywall when people will just go on a website and click and read it.
Yeah, it's just that addition to having all the other things that they have, was it the skins and filters and costumes and all that sort of stuff. And now it's like a text document. It is a bit of a, like, I can see the through line, but it is a bit weird.
It's sort of like what they did with the files in Resident Evil 6. You had to go on re.net to read the full versions.
Oh yes, yeah.
Yeah, and it was only in the full versions that all the juicy stuff was in there, like connections to other titles and things like that. It was ridiculous. There is actually a Japanese collector's edition, but for whatever reason or another, there is no statue this time. It's just a little acrylic stand of Grace. But then they did go on to confirm that a Grace statue is coming next year, sort of toward the end of 2026, I think.
I wouldn't be surprised also if there's a reason why you would hold off a European and US collector's edition. If there's something they want to reveal that would be spoiled, and that they will reveal closer to the date, and then announce a bigger collector's box like they've done for all the other games in the last decade. More recently, because so far it's just steelbook with deluxe content in the game, and some places have got like a lenticular sleeve cover as well.
I actually saw it. I went to the Smith's toy shop today again. I'm not paid by these people, but I just happened to see it advertised, and you can actually go and pre-order it, and they had the box there and everything. It's always quite nice to see your kind of game franchise ready for pre-order. It's so infrequent now to actually see physical games on the shelves. It was just quite nice to see that I could pre-order it if I so wished. And very tempted, but I'll hold out just to see what else comes along. And they also mentioned as well the Apocalypse costumes.
To extra pre-order bonus, which
an interesting choice of words.
Also interesting framing, as if there's something else that's supposed to be in that image, because there's a gap, which is suspicious.
Yes, we see. I like there's been a lot of fun speculation, which is always the best kind. That was it. Grace is standing in exactly the same position as Ark Thompson does for his artwork.
It is uncannily similar, to be honest. But at the end of the day, it's just a gun-holding stance, isn't it? Let's not get too excited.
Proof that we cling on to anything here at REP.
It's a neat observation. I don't even think it was intentional. It's just one of those things. It's like the way Ethan Winters in Village has a very similar coat to Ark Thompson. Fucking hell, maybe Capcom just go back to Ark every time they need some inspiration on a new RE character.
Or just stares at the artwork. Yeah, he's got a good idea there. Actually, just spent some sort of graffiti on a wall somewhere, and the remains of records that says Ark Thompson is alive.
He's Grace's father.
Don't start that. Please don't start the fandom. No,
sorry.
Next bit of news, it's slightly old news now, but I thought it'd be worth bringing up. Recently, there was an interview with the GOG team where they were discussing their recently ported Resident Evil 2 and 3 over to GOG, and they were... I'm not sure they were supposed to do this, but they stated quite explicitly that they really had to convince Capcom that people wanted to play these original games. And when I read this, I was quite alarmed that Capcom, who do have, obviously a very long and, learned history in the video games industry and have a good history of being able to release good collections, but there's something about Resident Evil that they don't mimic with, say, Street Fighter series or the Mega Man series or anything like that. And it's really concerning that they seem to want... It's not unusual that they want people to pay the remakes because obviously they make more money from it, but at the same time, it's a little bit odd that they didn't think anyone would want to play the original Resident Evil 2 and 3.
Yeah, in hand with that, I think it's been revealed that it was not Capcom's decision to bring 2 and 3 to PSN, it was actually Sony's. I think Sony pushed for it.
It makes sense too, because they were quite often on the requested lists frequently. Had been on the requested lists previously, even on the PS3 version was one of the reasons why those versions came out. Yeah, just looking at the quote, Nick, it's so crazy. Like, I've forgotten that people were talking about this. Capcom were like, we have all those remakes. It's already the superior experience for those games. They didn't really see the value in bringing back the vanilla versions. It took a lot of convincing that there's an audience that has a lot of memories about those games and would love to experience exactly the same game again. Thankfully, we were able to convince them.
Shocking. This is the 30th anniversary year, or near to it. That doesn't bode well, does it?
I was just going to say, the fact that they ended up doing absolutely amazing hopefully proves to Capcom something, because obviously GOG would come back to them and said, these did really well. And they also ended up doing Dino Crisis as well. It's like, Dino Crisis and Dino Crisis 2. So hopefully it bodes well that Capcom has a better understanding at this point that there is a fan base out there for these earlier games as much as the new ones.
This has gone hand in hand as well with the big 30th anniversary video that they spent, a few weeks building up to, and you've never seen a greater erasure of the first 20 years of the series, have you? For a celebration, celebratory video, the fact that it literally just covered the RE Engine games with the tiniest of glimpses of RE5 and 6, which was just throwaway at best, just crazy to me.
And then the mural that they put on the background, which is the same one they put online, is in the background, like literally is the only other connective link to the entire history of the franchise. I'm like,
It's so odd. It's almost like they're ashamed of them for some reason.
The thing is, it's not a Capcom-wide thing, like you say, Nick. You hit the nail on the head. It's an RE thing, because when you look at like the fighting game divisions, like you can't praise the work they did on like the Fighting Collection 2 that came out earlier this year with the Capcom versus SNK titles on it. That is a comprehensive collection, and they've even done additional work to like modify the ROMs a little bit to incorporate features from like the PSP versions and stuff like that. So there is certainly teams within Capcom that really push to try and get their legacy to modern players.
I was going to say, Sean, because when Street Fighter hit its 30th, they did a 30th anniversary collection. When they've had their arcade collections, certain game collections, they've done 2 of those arcade ones, and they're fully featured, and they have multiple versions and all that sort of stuff in those. And yeah, it's crazy. I don't get it. I really don't.
Unless they've just lost all the original assets and stuff, like they've done with the remake.
Then you look at what GOG's done in the PSN, which tells you that there's clearly the ability to emulate these. And so you can build a software platform that is framed around that emulation. I don't see why you couldn't provide different versions based off the final code. As we talked about on the Discord, it's like these most recent versions of the originals that end up on the PSN, the PAL versions have never been made digital for 2 and 3. They were always the NTC versions, but the PAL versions are in there now, which is, they're not the best versions, but it's still part of that preservation. They've preserved those versions to play on modern platforms. That's amazing. Like, they weren't part of the original release on PS3. You only had the NTC versions and Japanese ones. That was it. So there's obviously some people who can do the work. It's just whether or not Capcom has an interest, cares, or hires a outsourcing company to help them do it. And it doesn't seem like they're particularly interested unless someone comes to them first.
I think even if you take their approach at face value, and they think, why would anyone, play them because we've got superior versions. I still don't see the harm. If you're new to the series and you've gone through from Resident Evil 2, perhaps you've gone back to Remake and 0, but only played quote unquote the modern games. The fact that there are at least 4 old school, kind of pre-rendered tank control games out there, someone might be interested. It'd be cool. I really love Resident Evil 2 and 3 Remake. Wouldn't it be funny just to see what the original's like? Just have it available. I know it is now, but obviously it's like they're getting blood from a stone with Capcom. It's like there's no harm in it. And that's the thing I find really baffling. It's it's almost like they're trying to cancel them, and I don't really know why. Anyway,
in many ways, a remake is free advertising for your classic game.
Yeah,
because it creates a curiosity amongst players to see where it came from, and in many cases, in many cases you'll find that someone will start with a remake. That'll be their induction, and they'll try the original experience and prefer it. And therefore give you money to buy like the PSM version or something where they might not have been interested before. It's madness.
It is. Well, we'll see what happens. Hopefully, fingers crossed for a 30th collection at some point. Final bit of news, Survival Unit use. Yes, we couldn't go a podcast without Survival Unit, no. Well, folks, by the time you listen to this podcast, assuming our edit is in the usual manner, Survival Unit will be out. You'll be able to download it. The worldwide release, I think, is scheduled for November 18th. I think 17th in some places. I think it kind of moves depending on the time zones. It's 17th, 18th, I think they've said. It's already in some parts of the world. I think it's your part of the world as well, isn't it, Rob?
Yeah, they did a soft release earlier for certain people. It wasn't a full region because I went looking and I couldn't find it because I thought I'll go and have a look. That it still had a coming soon for mine when I looked on the app stores. So yeah, I must have either missed a window or it does it at random as part of a mid soft launch. But yeah. Nick, you're taking time off to play this game, is that correct?
No, I just happen to have this week off.
All next week.
Oh, next.
Yeah, depending on when you listen to this podcast, ladies and gentlemen, we'll be several days into the search party for Nick. He's gone into a mobile gaming deep dive.
The worst part will be how much money he spends on all the microtransactions.
None.
No, this one. He's going to break his own rule for this one. I bet you. He's going to break his own rule.
Are you looking forward to that keen base building experience, Nick?
No, I'm not. I mean,
pick up the random files.
I'm looking forward to that tiny 15 minutes of exploration and go to what we could have had. But I'll give it a go. I've watched a lot of it. A lot of it's on YouTube, isn't it? It's not my type of game.
I will say this. This is the only positive I'll give it. I was flabbergasted. I was literally lost for words when I saw images of some of the classic Tyrants returning from spin-off games like the Hypnos and the Tyrant from Dead Aim. That is a deep dive of assets. That is.
Tyrant R's there as well from Outbreak. Hypnos Tyrant is in it. And the T091.
Can even have enough Tyrants of Speedos.
Sweeper's there as well. They brought him back. We'll see. I don't know how much we're going to cover it on the podcast. We might do a little.
Well, if you're involved, probably a lot. If it wasn't for you, probably none.
That does finish the news. Just a quick thank you to our two new patrons who have joined, Jonathan Stark and Psycho Adamantis. Thank you very much for your contribution. If anyone's interested in joining our Patreon, you can head over to our website, and there's a link under the community tab, or just search Patreon itself for the Resident Evil podcast. You should see us there. That does finish the first part of the podcast. We now turn our attention to our main discussion, which is our deep dive into the Tyrant virus itself.
One of the men from Chicago who came to assist the T-virus research used his girlfriend's name as his password.
Tyrant virus is a super virus, which creates a monster which is much stronger than human beings.
This does not make any sense. How was the T-virus leaked? And why did it contaminate both the lab and the mansion, as well as a train almost 3 miles away?
That's irrelevant. We must make sure no knowledge of this gets out.
It had a strain of T-virus in it. It's similar to the virus we found in the infected that have been turning up in the city.
An attack by terrorists that somehow got hold of the T-virus.
I will simply say goodbye to Umbrella. The biological weapon utilizing the T-virus has almost been completed. Our only remaining task is to acquire combat data.
My husband is the man responsible for the creation of the T-virus.
I'll disperse a T-virus in every populated area in the U.S. Its deadline is midnight.
The Tyrant virus leaked, polluting this whole place, and unfortunately, I had to give up my lovely members of STARS.
It took the T-virus inside of my queen years to procreate my new life.
Right, the T-virus, everyone's favourite zombie turning virus. I would say out of all the Resident Evil jargon that we've ever had, this is one of the few things that I think has made it outside into popular culture. I think a lot of people know or have heard of the T-virus, same with perhaps Umbrella Corp, as an organisation. The T-virus has been there since the very beginning. You first see that Cerberus as this weird mutant dog, and then you've got the famous head turn of the zombie, and you're in a whole world of pain. And what's brilliant about this is that, as we've often discussed, especially with the first game, is you go in not knowing anything, going, what the hell's going on with this house? But through your exploration of the Spencer Mansion, the acquisition of some of the most amazing files, I would say, in video game history, you start to learn of something disastrous happening in the Arclay labs. And the deeper you go into the game, the more information you learn, and the experiments that Umbrella took on some of the creatures that you have faced. And it's only got better from there, hasn't it, ladies and gentlemen? Resident Evil 2 rapidly expanded it with the insertion of the G virus, whilst also discussing more about what the T virus can do. Then we had parasitic properties in Resident Evil 3. So where we start, as a kind of general discussion, I think, is there are lots of variants of the T virus. And it's not that well documented. I think, despite there being many files and archive books and all sorts over the years, it's still never as explicit as it could be about the different variants of T-virus. So that's one of the main focal points today. We're going to kind of go through that. But we can generalize a lot of the properties of the T-virus, what it does specifically on creatures. And I think I've personally definitely raised this in podcasts when perhaps being a little bit more critical of, say, the C virus or the Plagas. The T virus is remarkably consistent. And you can see this through with every game where the T virus is the kind of lead viral agent, if you want to call it that. So let's go through them then. We've got mammals, insects, fish, birds, all these kind of things, and what the T virus does.
So T-virus, if you want to look at it from the lore aspect, is a generalised term for any weaponised variant of Progenitor virus. It basically takes the DNA mutation properties found in Progenitor and basically just improves on it. There's a lot of Japanese books in particular that go into quite fascinating detail about what the T-virus is capable of. You know, it rewrites a host's DNA, which obviously leads to all the weird and wonderful creatures we see throughout the series. It adapts to its environment. Every living organism is a vector for infection. When someone or something is infected by the T-virus, the whole body is influenced, and one particular trait is an unusual secretion of growth hormone, which greatly increases the size of the host and is particularly noticeable in insects, reptiles and arthropods, and that's why we also see some enlarged zombies in certain games. It dulls the pain receptors, heightens aggression, and that results in advanced durability and attacking capacity, which is obviously fundamental when you're going to create BOWs. It rapidly slows down a host's metabolism, which is what leads to the tissue decay, which is more prominent in some species than others. And probably, I would say, the most common feature is the brain degeneration and loss of intelligence, which leads to problems around control and the teaching of commands to bioweapons, and that's obviously a problem that's consistent throughout the whole series. What else? Oh, it also makes it easier to combine the genetic information from different creatures to create these kind of hybrids, such as the Chimera and things like the Hunter, which uses fusion of human and reptile DNA.
It is true that what you mentioned there, John. Throughout the series, a lot of insects just notably get big, and you see that quite prevalent in Resident Evil 0. But that continues on. You've got things like the scissor tails in Outbreak 2. Although oddly, cockroaches, they seem to be the only thing that don't. But yeah, it's true. Like what you would call a bug seems to get much, much bigger. Fish get bigger. We've seen that with the Neptune across all the different types that we've seen. But mammals and birds seemingly, or most cases, stay roughly the same sort of size. I think giant bat is possibly one of the only few exceptions. I'm thinking, this is my BOW knowledge coming through.
In insects, yes, you're right about the rapid growth, but other than the growth, they don't sort of physically change.
No.
And that's kind of speculated because insects are like some of the oldest organisms on the planet. They're already sort of halfway to an evolutionary dead end. So they're not going to be as susceptible to change as some more modern organisms, like humans, for example. Arthropods usually show the most size increase, if I remember correctly. Things like the Stinger from 0, and they don't show much sign of necrosis either. Breeding capacity increases, and any organisms with poison, such as the spiders, their poison usually becomes more poisonous because of the virus. And mammals, obviously, I would say they show the most muscular growth and probably the most visible skin decay, I would say.
There's also the, I wanted to point out, sort of like the irregular mutants as well from Resident Evil 3. So the Drain Demos and the Brain Suckers, they are fleas or other parasites that are attached. I think they were attached to other creatures, possibly the Gravedigger, if I remember correctly. But I think it's implied that they've got lots of other bits in them, which has caused them to kind of like mutate into something very different to, say, the megabytes and gigabytes that you see in the Outbreak series, which are just enlarged fleas that randomly have the ability to roll down railway tracks. But we won't question that bit. Sean, did you have any preliminary thoughts on some of the BOWs that we've seen over the years?
It's one of those things, isn't it, that I think they struck gold straight away and they've been chasing it ever since. I think you will struggle to beat a lot of those designs in that first game, to be honest. I think the Hunter is certainly my favourite BOW, but only really taken in the context of the original trilogy, not so much how they've been reinterpreted in later games. The Chimera is pure nightmare fuel, and I think, you know, the remake redesigned them quite grotesquely well, and the lore backstory to something like the Chimera is disgusting and the sort of body horror you would want from a series like this. I think they've been chasing a virus as effective as the T-Virus in terms of its like narrative building and stuff since. The fact that it's a weaponized thing that gets on the black market in later entries makes it really interesting. I suppose from a frustrating point of view, because of how Capcom distribute their lore, additional lore, often lore that's not featured in the games, we have a sense of confusion around the T-Virus, and this comes down to all the variants, which I'm sure we'll get into later, but not only does it cause a confusion amongst the fandom as to, like, you know, what VACs lead to certain creatures and things like that, the fact that different strains will make Crimson Heads, different strains will make Lickers. There's no actual Western material within any of the games that allude to which is which. And I think this is eternally frustrating because you do actually see not only people in the wider community who do like lore-based Twitter accounts get it wrong, but you also see Capcom themselves get it wrong. You know, this is why we have very, very strange decisions like having Crimson Heads running around Raccoon City in Operation Raccoon City, which you could put down to a slant 6 thing, not having the access to the right materials. But then I was actually researching a few bits for this podcast today and remembered that Crimson Heads appear in Beginnings in Umbrella Chronicles, which they shouldn't do because it's not quite right in terms of timelines. It's just bizarre, and it shows like, you know, Capcom have a certain confusion around it as well. It's just a bit messy, I think. You know, John will maybe correct me if I'm wrong here, but I still don't think there's actually any officially translated Western materials that actually break down the different variants and strain history, which takes us to like the Epsilon featured in the mansion and things like that.
No, you're right, there isn't, and that has been a significant problem. I've spoken with people who think there is just one T-Virus. They don't understand there's been different variants because it has been that vague. It's just the same virus all the way through the series, and it just does different things because of whatever. But this has been a problem with the series right since its very conception. I think the only mention of the Epsilon strain, for example, in Western media is actually in Resident Evil Resistance, if I remember correctly.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. Wesker's report mentions different variants, for example. Wesker's report 2, I should say, but it doesn't go into detail. What really unlocked the door for me was when I got my first batch of Japanese books, just a random obscure guide by Capcom for the original Director's Cut game. It's got at least 30 pages of lore just on the T-Virus, and it had the Alpha strain, it had the Epsilon strain, the Beta strain, the Beta 2 strain. I just couldn't believe it. It was like a whole different world had just opened in front of me, which is what started my passion for collecting the Japanese materials. But you're right, absolutely none of this is in the game. And that is quite shocking, considering the T-Virus is such a fundamental part of Resident Evil history.
So I remember being quite surprised that doesn't Leon mention this is a different strain of the T-Virus in Infinite Darkness? And that was oh yeah, they are mentioning strains. Romby, what about you? I'm going to lead you in for your comments as well, but I'm just going to say, just to follow up from Sean's, the original design, I think, of the enemies from the original game are gold standard. And what I liked about it when I first played it was that it was believable in a kind of like, obviously this is not believable in the slightest Resident Evil, but there was a degree of truth behind it. You could see a virus that turns people into zombies. Yes, I could see it doing a similar sort of thing to what it did to the snake, to the shark, you know, all the plant as well. Yeah, that you know, I get it. Visually, you can see that. And then when the hunters came in, you were like, oh, okay, this is a little bit more cryptic. But then you picked up the slides in the lab and you're like, oh, these are products. This isn't an accident. This is a thing. And then, you know, you began to learn, I think, in Survivor about how it was made, and it all kind of fell into place. And you're like, yeah, I get it. And that, for me, is where a lot of the recent games, I've been a little bit critical, because I just, you know, why does this happen? And the original games, you didn't need to see it. Even like a liquor, which isn't explained in the game, but you could see that it was a human. Anyway, for me, that was a real sticking point for me as to why I love the series right at the beginning, just because of that degree of scientific, I don't know, resonance that perhaps exists.
No, I 100% agree. It's interesting too because they put them in the context of things in the remakes, and the remakes are not inherently wrong, but they've like gone with the idea that they have to do a more visually identifiable thing, right? And I think in the Resident Evil 1 remake, obviously they just went with the idea that aside from adding the Crimson Heads, they went for the idea that we're just going to do a more detailed version of the thing we've already done, so that you see the sort of detail that we would have been able to do in 1986 that we would have wanted to do, but can now do. But when it's come to like the later remakes, 2 and 3, rather than just adapting the T-Virus elements of those games, they've kind of reinvented the wheel, and not always necessarily in a good way in some respects. They've added extra complications. I mean, look at the whole Parasite stuff for the Nemesis and Resident Evil 3 remake, as opposed to just having the variety of T-Virus related creatures just part of the Raccoon City outbreak that exist in that game. And inherently, that's one of those things I always liked about both the original game, elements of 2, obviously, because obviously there's G-Virus creatures, but for the most part it's T-Virus again, and same with 3, was that you got to see this variety of impacts that the virus has, or the strains of the virus in some respects also, have on things. Which for me was part of the appeal. It's like, what sort of crazy enemy designs am I going to see? What sort of creatures, as you've alluded to earlier on, like what sort of bugs, insects, lizards, whatever creatures they are, how are they going to be impacted by this virus in an interesting way? But still felt consistent, that there was a consistent through line of like, this is clearly the impact of a type of virus that quite often increases growth, increases their decay, decreases certain elements, but at least makes some really interesting characters that feel like they are somewhat grounded in at least the base of what they were to begin with, be it a giant worm, be it a snake, be it a spider, be it whatever it is. And I think that to me always appealed straight off the bat, like that there was like a byproduct. I mean, part of that was also the idea, and this is, I don't know if you want to go into this as far as like from a development standpoint, but the idea that once they settled on zombies, they kind of realized that just having them as the only enemy was not going to cut the mustard for the whole game. So it started that idea of like, what other creatures could be impacted by an outbreak at this mansion, and then started working outwards from there. And I think that first game in particular, but also just the original games in general, really nailed that concept of like, there's an outbreak, so we expect that this virus is going to do these sorts of like unexpected consequences of things, and we're going to have these things that have been slightly designed as well in the mix. And I think those balances are really good. And I don't want to like say like only the original games did it really well, because that's not entirely true either. But I just feel like that was part of such an appeal in the early days for me, as part of like another part of the thing that made me enjoy the franchise, as far as the lore, but also the visual lore of it.
And I think there's a lot of leeway that can be given. It's just you want a little bit of explanation. So, you can't really fault some of the designs in, say, Resident Evil 4. And, we can forgive a lot of things. If you go, oh, look, Del Lago, that's a salamander with Plagas. Got it. Right. El Gigante. Why? And you just don't quite get... It takes a little bit of work, and they haven't really ever filled it in with exactly how these things kind of come into existence. But there's something like the Comios or the Adule, you're like, got it.
That's even when you look at something like Code Veronica, like obviously you've got like this change of the T Veronica virus, but there's also obviously T virus elements in this. The seemingly more fantastical elements, so like the giant crazy tentacle thing, still at least feels consistent with what we've seen prior to that game, right? Like there's still some element of truth to what this all kind of runs through. And it isn't until 4 when they were just like, really, we just need an explanation to have a bunch of different enemy designs and quite varied. And the franchise has quite often run in that direction. 5, 6, not that they're not interested in creative designs, don't get me wrong, but there's definitely a much more like just out there design concept that they just went, we want to create interesting creature designs for combat, or we want to create interesting, we don't really care if there's a consistency or design at this point. It's more about just having something different. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it does seem to lose some of that appeal of like what it feels like that they've actually thought through what the sort of outbreak has had an impact to create the enemy designs. It's kind of not a forethought anymore.
The best example I can give, I remember when I picked up the Resident Evil 3 guide that came with the map, the Raccoon City map. And that was the first time I saw that Raccoon City had a zoo. And I thought, oh, oh, I bet that's good. I don't want to go there for obvious reasons, but I bet that's good. And then, years later, we then get Outbreak 2 going, you're going to Raccoon Zoo, and it's exactly how I thought it was going to be. And that's the genius of it. I didn't know what animals they were going to pick, but they were all exactly as you would expect based on, because that's the last T-Virus game, isn't it? Outbreak File 2. They're exactly how you expect them to be based on all the games prior. And it's a compliment, I would say. Okay, so that's a kind of quick overview of our thoughts, but I think we need to go back to the beginning. And John's already teased us there with the fact that the T-Virus itself is the weaponized version of the Progenitor Virus, which has long been a staple of the series. I think it's first mentioned as the Clay Virus. I think that's right, John, isn't it, in the original Director's Cut Japanese version?
So if you think of the T-Virus and all its variants now as we know it, originally in old biohazard law, it was the Clay virus. So you had the Clay virus alpha strain, the Clay virus beta strain, etc. The Epsilon strain was called T-Virus because that was the strain that allowed them to create the Tyrant. So the Clay virus Epsilon strain is the only variant which is designated T-Virus. That was obviously changed when they brought the remake out on the GameCube in 2002 and wrote Wesker's Report 2. They kind of retconned the Clay virus to be in the T-Virus from the very beginning. And the only problem with that is the name Tyrant kind of doesn't make sense anymore, because it was called Tyrant, obviously, because that was the name of the human biological weapon they were able to create. But having the word Tyrant from the get-go, there's no real logical answer for why they've called it that.
Has it long been speculated that I think they christened it as a thing against Spencer or something like that?
I think that was a Perry thing in one of her novels. I think
was it?
Because Marcus created it, and obviously he was in his feud with Spencer at the time, he called it Tyrant after Spencer.
Let's remind ourselves then, Progenitor Virus, as in one of the main focal points of Resident Evil 5, discovered by the Indopire tribe at the Stairway to the Sun. And what's interesting about the Progenitor Virus is it is, I think, and remains the most deadly virus in the Resident Evil series. And we've barely seen it in action. And this is one of the main problems with the Progenitor Virus, is that through the discovery by Henry Travis and his things, and the documentation of the Indopire tribe and that almost initiation process that some go through, it's quickly established, or theorized, should I say, that if you are attuned to the Progenitor Virus, it's going to give you superhuman powers of some description. But it's very vague as to what there is. But you can see a lot of the tribe's drawings in Resident Evil 5 and its potential mutation qualities. But the inherent problem, the inherent flaw of the Progenitor Virus is it's just too damn deadly.
Yes, and Resident Evil 5 tells us that if you are one of the lucky few who can adapt perfectly to it, you're basically granted immortality. And there's legends of a particular Endopire king living for hundreds of years, and he's the one who built all the tricks and traps we see in the cave system in Resident Evil 5, because it was all part of a trial for worthy people to become his successor. This was documented hundreds of thousands of years later by Henry Travis, who, when he was exploring Africa, he wrote down these legends, and we know that the books were discredited by his own family because they wanted to exploit the information for themselves to make lots of money by digging up Africa. But Spencer got hold of a copy of the book, he read the legends, he believed them, he thought it was true, and that's what ignited his passion for achieving immortality and wanting to artificially accelerate human evolution. And that's the sort of genesis or the backbone of the whole story.
Only through virus, not mold. Don't like mold.
Yeah, he doesn't like mold. Much prefers virus because he wants, exponential infection of the masses. This all culminates in the 1966 expedition where Edward Ashford, James Marcus himself, and Brandon Bailey, they find Progenitor. So they bring it back to America. This is what's going to kickstart Umbrella. They're going to weaponize the virus. They're going to create biological weapons for profit to fund this ongoing research to try and reduce the poisonous nature of Progenitor and make it more adaptable so they can all become gods.
Simple.
Yeah.
That's what we all want in life, to become gods. And we're going to do it with a flower, with a virus from a flower.
I say all three of them. Obviously, we don't really know anything about Edward Ashford's motivations. And I think James Marcus was more bothered about just extrapolating how the virus worked. It was only really Spencer who wanted godhood, I would say, out of the three of them.
Resident Evil 5 is a bit of a funny one. You get a lot of this towards the end of the game, more so than at the beginning. But I always praise Capcom for actually doing doing a really good job in kind of tying up what was already preset in, say, Wesker's report and Resident Evil 0, and being able to use the idea that Progenitor is almost 100% lethal, and then kind of like change that into the kind of current storyline at the time with regards to the Ouroboros project by Wesker and this kind of godhood. I mean, it was a little bit over the top, as you would expect, but it's certainly one of Resident Evil 5's strongest points.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
I was going to say, one has to wonder, and this must be a fear for you, John, certainly, with all the material at your disposal, that if the rumours are true and we have a 0 remake on the horizon, they're going to have to try and adhere to the RE5 backstory. You know, how RE5's files were so seemingly interwoven with that history of the Stairway to the Sun and the expedition and everything like that. Like, you can literally piece together Brandon Bailey's diary. He fills in the blanks that are the gaps in Marcus's diary. Like, it's so well cohesively told that I just, fear that we're not going to have that cohesion when we get to a remake situation. Because whichever way you look at it, either 0 or 5 is next, outside of Code Veronica. And each one of those games, coincidentally, deals with this history of the Progenitor Virus. And is that lore locked in? I just wonder. Because it's so beautiful how it all interweaves at the minute. You have to play 2 or 3 different games, but it is cohesive. And that's a credit to the original Capcom writers, that they were so respectful to make it work, that I just don't know what's going to happen in the future.
No, I agree completely, and I think the biggest danger really is the rumoured remake of Code Veronica and what they'll do there, because as you said, there's so many pieces in place. The only missing piece of the puzzle is Edward Ashford, and I presume any remake of Code Veronica will deep dive on him, and whatever they decide to do with him could fundamentally change a lot of what is some of my favourite material in the series. The whole origins of the T-Virus, the feuds with Spencer, and like you say, the events which culminate in what happens in 5.
Rob, what's your take? Have you always been a fan of the way that they've, I would say retrospectively, but made the Progenitor like the #1 virus? Do you think that made sense leading up to the game? I mean, there's lots of clues of the mother virus, which is the same thing from 0 and in Code Veronica as well. Do you think that works?
Well, it's interesting because I think back to the early days of it with all these different names, and I think it did add a little bit of confusion to people in the very early days in the West. And that once that started to actually coalesce, it was actually a really good thing, not only just in the understanding of expanding plot, but actually being able to put those lines together. Because as you just mentioned, there was the mother virus, this clay virus got into the West. There's these elements that everyone was like, are they different things? Are they the same thing? We're not sure. It was unclear. And I'm talking about in the first, kind of 3 or 4 years of being in the fandom online. So when these storylines started to coalesce more, especially from Code Veronica onwards, people were like, oh, this is actually starting to make sense. And of course it helped that by then there was this nascent level of deep diving into files and creating timelines was starting to happen on the internet. So people who were engaged in these sort of elements were starting to get a better understanding of it all. So if anything kind of changes in regards to the remakes, it will be a bit of a shame because, as you've all alluded to, it's all kind of pieced itself relatively well together. So the hope is that while I know the other remakes have changed stuff from a storytelling, within the game element, I don't feel fundamentally the narrative underpinning the lore has changed drastically. I mean, there's been elements obviously that have changed. I think 4 remakes probably had the bigger changes when it comes to that sort of stuff. So I would hope that they would look at these and go, if they are remaking 0 and Code Veronica particularly, they would go, well, we'll look at the narrative connections between those two. And if they ended up remaking 5, they look at the obvious connections 5 has to explaining all of this narrative and go, let's not mess with that. Let's focus on changing all the other elements about the gameplay and maybe the structure of the actual game's story narrative as far as the characters in it. But as far as the lore is concerned, we don't really have to do too much to change that. We just keep those elements the same because there's no reason to change them. There's no extra work being needed to put in some extra files or record some dialogue that makes a reference to what we've already established, because those things don't really fundamentally need changing. They can expand, but they don't need changing. So it's a bit of a tough one, I think.
The T-Virus project itself, then post the establishment of Umbrella, Umbrella was used was almost like a shell company, wasn't it, to shield the world's eyes from what Spencer's original and ultimate aim was. But through that, he was able to set up with the founders different plans, different structures to try and create, as I've said earlier, kind of like a neutered version of the Progenitor Virus. Because the Progenitor Virus was so lethal, the whole point of the T virus was to make it a little less lethal and make it adaptable to humans. I'm guessing that was obviously Spencer's plan, so that he could take a jot of the super T virus and become the god that the Indopire tribes kind of allude to. I assume early on he must have realised that he wasn't a suitable candidate for just taking the Progenitor Virus. I wonder how he came to that conclusion.
Well, the Trevor family are the first kind of unofficial victims of the T-Virus project, because the reason Jessica and Lisa Trevor were experimented on was Spencer's first objective was to create a variant of Progenitor which wouldn't kill the host, or a variant the host could survive through, and he would worry about acquiring the benefits later. So that's where you get the Type A and Type B variants mentioned in Remake. And obviously Jessica died, and Lisa was the first breakthrough, because even though it severely physically disfigured her and eroded her intelligence, she survived infection by Progenitor, essentially. So that was the first early success.
Yeah. And then through that, I suppose they started to realise that there was something quite viable, and they needed to research it forward, and they needed money to do it. So the idea being that they could create BOWs at some point to be able to sell on the black market and create a kind of, hostile world where they could directly profit from being being a key point of the T-Virus project. So you kind of had a position where you've got public, nice-facing Umbrella selling your Aquacures and whatnot, and then you've got your nasty side of Umbrella making BOWs to sell on the black market, and then above that, you've got Spencer, who's got a completely different plan and idea to, all the other executives that work underneath him as to why he's doing all this. And, what he'd like to do was set a competitive rivalry between his co-founders, and you see that evidenced with Ashford as well. Well, he quickly left, didn't he, and decided to head off and do something else with regards to the Progenitor Virus.
Well, all three founders, basically, they all knew that whoever created the first viable T-Virus would ultimately gain control of the whole company. But what was clever about Spencer was he seemed to realise that he wasn't skilled enough to create it himself. He believed Marcus was going to make the breakthrough. So he was going to manipulate Marcus, keep him close, which is why he stops him from going to Africa and splits him up from Brandon Bailey. He believed Marcus would eventually create the first T-Virus, and when that time came, he would just step in and take it. Edward Ashford was doing his own T-Virus research. As I've already mentioned, we know practically nothing about him. The Umbrella Chronicles novels, which I appreciate, are grey canon. They make reference that Edward Ashford's sole priority was the reputation of his family, which I suppose tallies in with what we know of the other family members of the Ashfords. And James Marcus wasn't particularly interested in Umbrella at the time. He just wanted to concentrate on unlocking the secrets of Progenitor. He was obsessed with it to the point where he didn't really notice Spencer was trying to take over from behind the scenes.
And we still don't know how Edward died, do we?
Well, he died in a lab accident when he was exposed to Progenitor, but then good old Archives 2, which came along many years later, revealed that his research was sabotaged by Spencer, or agents working for Spencer, which resulted in him being exposed to the virus, and because he was an elderly man by that time, he was never going to adapt to it, and he died. And Spencer was also aware that his son, Alexander, was not sufficiently skilled enough to take the T-Virus research forward. So basically the Ashfords, this was 1968 as well, so only 3 or 4 months after Umbrella had been founded. And already the Ashfords were kind of out of the game, so it was down to Spencer's team and Marcus's team. And we know when Marcus became director of the management training facility, he would work on it for almost a decade until he makes the first viable T-Virus in September 1977.
Attention, this is Dr. Marcus. Please be silent as we reflect upon our company motto. Obedience breeds discipline, discipline breeds unity, unity breeds power, power is life.
And that's what we see in Zero with the use of the leeches. And that seemed to be as you said, the breakthrough there in kind of combining, I mean, at a very crude level, it's just progenitor plus leech DNA, isn't it? That's what the games kind of imply. That seemingly has the benefit of neutering the T-virus to such an extent that it can create zombies, but not a lot of zombies. I think, is it 10%?
Well, there is a bit of logic behind the leech. It's not just a random thing. You know, we see from his notes in the game that Progenitor has difficulty bonding with a lot of organisms. So he thought, well, if I try something like a simple organism, something like a leech, where it pretty much exists just to feed, and obviously a leech attaches itself to different organisms, so it could easily spread the infection. You know, it should theoretically be easier for something simple like that to bond with the virus than, you know, something much more complex. But yes, you're right, his prototype T-virus, it basically killed most people. It made them ill, emaciated them. There's a file in Zero which alludes to this. There's the list of correctional inmates, I think it's called, where Marcus was basically abducting the trainees, locking them up in the basement and injecting them with the virus, and many of them died. Some were preserved as test subjects and sent to Arkley. And yeah, it's only sort of when the T-virus project kicks into gear with Wesker and Birkin at Arkley do they work on the problem of making the virus more potent so it'll create more zombies.
And there's always been a little bit of confusion. I think this was down to a lot of localization issues. The Eliminators, plague crawlers, which themselves are a kind of chimera type creature, and the lurkers, they are created from that early strain of the T-virus.
Yeah, but I think the reason the BOW report in Zero calls them progenitor experiments is because his T-virus isn't quite perfected yet, because if you remember, he says, yeah, I've achieved success, I've created it, this is September 1977, but it's not till January 1978. He says the T-virus is finally a success, so I'm assuming he still labels those experiments as progenitor because his T-virus, although theoretically successful, is not quite ready yet. But they are essentially T-virus creatures, yeah.
If you're ever concerned about why Rebecca gets bitten by Eliminator in Resident Evil Zero, canonically she is bitten in a cutscene and doesn't turn into a zombie. That's the reason why. Because it's a very, very weak strain of T-virus that the Eliminator carries. Or, as I like to headcanon, she was one of the few that was immune. What do you think, Sean, Rob, any of you, about this kind of early stage with Marcus?
I don't know if there's much I can say that John hasn't covered in theory, because I just remember going, it was cool to finally see a lot of this expanded that it slowly had been building over time. And obviously I think that was always the intent of Zero as a game, like not just as a prequel to the events of the Mansion incident, but to explain more of the backstory. So I think inherently they really did sit down and start thinking about all the elements. And obviously at the same time, Code Veronica's being produced. So they had this idea that obviously, I think it was all flagship related, to kind of start to build into the narrative of like how Umbrella came about, what all the point of this research was, what the viruses were, and almost as if there was like a roadmap and a guidebook to what this was all kind of alluding to and leading to, which obviously by the time Resident Evil 4 came out, it all kind of went out by the wayside because we were dumping Umbrella and we were, providing a new thing, so we didn't really need to follow that. And I feel like even some of the spin-off games post this kind of just went, well, we can just take these viruses and combine them and create new elements around it just to have different enemy types. And so you start to see that as well. So yeah, this is kind of like, I don't want to say it's the last bastion, because obviously Resident Evil 5 really did try to bring things back full circle, but it did feel like at the time this was a great, for lack of a term, lore dump, in the sense of like you got to learn a lot in such a small number of games about the entire history of what was going on and the backstory. But it took a while for the rest of it to pay off.
Yeah, I think if you were to sort of break down Zero, it's quite an unambitious game in terms of, like enemy designs and things like that. And it starts to get more interesting as you progress, and then you start to get to the Tyrants. I think, the infamous debut of the T001, which was very much a failure.
I remember at the time, and Sean, you might remember, when Zero came out, there was also a lot of confusion with regards to the creation of the T-virus as per that game, but also how that then linked in with Wesker's report too, which directly mentions the real-world Ebola virus. And I remember people getting a little bit confused about, well, how does Ebola link in with what we've seen in Zero and whether that was a retcon?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I do remember when I played Zero back in the day was how I felt it didn't link in with the glorious material of Wesker's Report 2. And let's be clear, like, when the remake came out, we got Wesker's Report 2 in a series of, was it like 5 weeks leading up to release or something like that? They released Wesker's Report 2 was distributed in 5 chapters. Each chapter is given its own title. It was nifty little flash files that you got to watch. You got to click through them, and it would play some eerie music in the background, and the letters of the pages would gradually fade in. There was images of Lisa and stuff in the background. It's some of the best material I still think that's ever been released for this series in terms of how to present lore in a way that's interesting and things like that.
I think fundamentally there's a real easy answer to that, which is that I'm sure the writing and understanding of lore for Zero was written when it was still supposed to be the N64 version, more or less.
Yeah.
And I think it just predated where they got to by the time they got to the remake. And it just so happened that because Zero obviously got translated over to the GameCube, and they didn't really need to rewrite a lot of the script and the story. I think inherently that's where those conflicts started to happen, because they started to look forward when they were rewriting and expanding the lore just to constantly move it forward. Because I felt like it all kind of, as kind of alluded to, there's definitely a lot more lineup than there was conflict, but the Wesker's Report 2 was the thing that really threw a spanner in the works in regards to a lot of that.
One of the things that's always amused me about the history of Umbrella and the creation of the T-Virus is that within a handful of like 2 or 3 years, you get Wesker's Report 2, you get Resident Evil 0, and you get Resident Evil Code Veronica. Now, in Resident Evil Code Veronica, the name James Marcus is never mentioned, and in Resident Evil 0, the name Edward Ashford is never mentioned. So it works, like you say, Rob, there's no contradictions as such, but it's not quite as interwoven as you'd have liked to have imagined at the time. And
yeah, definitely.
Well, Birkin was the creator of the T-Virus in Resident Evil 2.
Yeah.
Not that T-Virus, the different T-Virus.
Inherently, that's the thing, though. It's like, I think it leads to some confusion, but also then it adds to the lore about like this infighting over who's creating what, who's taking credit. Like, I don't know if it's intentional, but it makes it feel that way, which I think still kind of works. It plays well because it does look like, it looks like this whole thing of Spencer throwing these teams against each other and playing them off each other and manipulating people to get what he wants, which is kind of cool. I don't know if it was intentional, but it plays that way, and it's It's kind of cool in that respect.
I always remember as well with Wesker's Report 2 and the very precise dates they put on it. And I was always a little bit dubious in the Resident Evil 0 files that are mysteriously undated, or at least 19XX. And I think the American version was incorrectly put.
Yeah, there's the mistake, which didn't help. And then the worst part is that they corrected it for the PAL version.
They did. The PAL version was the original, the better one.
had the correct date, but then because it came last, but then when they did the remaster, they went back to the original one.
Oh, did they? Oh, no.
Yeah, because it's based off the US Japanese one, so the date's wrong in the HD version again.
Another funny thing about just very quickly, the files in Zero, the actual background text in one of them, I can't remember which one it is, actually tells us that the Progenitor Virus was discovered in Africa. But it's not actually mentioned in the file itself, which I thought was interesting.
Oh, yeah.
Nice. Africa's always been a big part of the series, isn't it? Always.
Yeah, the earliest hint is Dead Aim.
Well, inherently then Zero is the earliest. Then if you've got that, and you've obviously got the connection to Billy in Africa, which I always assumed was, theory.
I'm calling it now. You can sign and date this in the inevitable, because there's too many rumors about it now. I think it must be happening. The inevitable Zero remake, they are going to interweave Billy's little expedition into that village, into the origin of the Progenitor.
It'll probably be the training level, won't it?
Well, he's going to be involved in some way, because the remake seems to be shrinking this universe down to just being about a few key figures, and Billy will just have accidentally stumbled across the tribe.
Something Umbrella's doing with the tribe, and he ends up being the scapegoat.
Yeah, which is why he's being sentenced to execution and whatnot. Cover it up. They're going to do something like that. And again, you could argue it, like Lewis, it gives him more relevance in the series and things like that. But I just feel that when you make these kind of decisions, you just shrink your universe into it just being about a handful of people. It's similar to what we've seen in Star Wars and things, isn't it? It's like every time they retcon or bolt on something in Star Wars, it just shrinks the universe that much more. And I'd hate to see them do that in RE, really. As we get onto the tyrants, I don't know whether you're ready to go there yet, Nick.
No, we're stage oneing. We're in
Okay, yeah, that's
1978
fine
now. We've just stolen the T-Virus, and now the T-Virus is in the successful hands of Wesker and Birkin in the Arclay facility. And obviously, we've already mentioned Lisa Trevor, but this is where the first steps are taken to improve the Marcus strain. I think that's what's an unofficial term, the Marcus strain virus, into something more sellable, should we say. And John, this is where that first alpha strain of the T-Virus is created.
So the first 3 years of the T-Virus project in the late 70s to early 80s is all about stabilising the virus. The reason Birkin was so interested in Ebola was basically to make virus more infectious, because we know that Ebola has horrific consequences on the human body, and people bleed out of every single orifice or whatever, and it does that because the virus is trying to find another host. And that's the sort of genetic code that Birkin wanted to take and put into the T-Virus, because when a human becomes infected, the first thing that infected human would then want to do is actively seek out and find a new host to make the infection spread even more. And the reason Lisa Trevor is important is because whatever this type B progenitor variant did to it, it kind of did give her immortality in the fact that whatever they seem to do to her, she won't die. So basically, whenever they tried to strengthen the T-Virus and made their little variants, they would test it on her, and she would always survive the process. So every single time she survived, they would see what effect it had on her, and then they would take a blood sample and extract a recombined strain of T-Virus from her blood, and then they would repeat it over and over. And you would get many different T-Viruses with all these minute little differences, and the alpha strain T-Viruses actually comes from the blood of a giant spider. The giant spider is one of the very first BOWs created, and when they took a sample of its blood, the virus had mutated to the point where it was distinctly different enough so they could name it a new variant. So the alpha T-Virus strain actually comes from the blood of a giant spider, and the alpha T-Virus strain is what later creates the Neptune. So that goes on for like 3 years, and by the time we get to 1981, the virus is stable enough to infect humans to the point where 90% of humans will become a zombie. And the only reason it's not 100% is because every human's different, therefore 10% is always going to have a natural immunity to it.
So this is the beta 1 strain.
Yes, and at this point, Wesker and Birkin are like, right, we've done our job. The T-Virus is pretty much perfect. We can use this variant to create things like the Cerberus, the Chimera. Let's take it to Spencer and say, job done. And Spencer, because he wants a virus that'll wipe out all of humanity or change all of humanity, killing a majority and leaving only those worthy behind, he's like, no, 90% isn't good enough. Go away and bring me back something that has a 100% infection rate. And both Wesker and Birkin knew this was impossible, but Spencer kept chucking money at them and saying, right, do this. And this is what sparks Wesker's quest to find out what Spencer's really after, because to him it just doesn't make any sense. So Birkin is still working on the beta 1 strain, and he makes improvements to that, which leads to the beta 2 strain, and the beta 2 strain is what's used to create the Hunter. And sort of simultaneously at this point, the Ashfords have come back into the game, because you've got Alexia Ashford, who is cloned genius of Veronica, and Alexander's belief is she's more intelligent than Birkin. She will create the ultimate T-Virus, completely monopolise the whole project, and therefore bring back glory to the Ashford name and elevate them back to the top of Umbrella, and stop Spencer from getting total control, which is mentioned in the files in Code Veronica. So Alexia's T-Virus research is obviously T-Veronica, which is a T-Virus but differs from all the other strains because it incorporates genes from an ancient queen ant. But as time goes on, because we all know Alexia's a bit of a narcissist and she's got this superiority complex, she becomes less and less interested in helping the Ashfords reclaim Umbrella than she is using T Veronica to infect everyone and control them and basically create a global ant hive where she is the queen. So she kind of goes off the rails in that respect. And Wesker's report too talks about this whole jealousy thing she has with Birkin. And her research obviously culminates in putting herself to sleep for 15 years. But as far as Birkin and everyone else are aware, she died. So in their eyes, T. Veronica's a failure. The Ashfords are dead. No one's going to take over. No one expects anything from Alfred Ashford. Therefore, Birkin's back in sole charge. He's Umbrella's hero, and he can take the T-Virus forward. And during this time is where Birkin carries out sort of gene splicing experiments where they take multiple organisms and put them together, because the T-Virus can help do that. So you get all kinds of, you know, the creatures you mentioned in Nemesis, the irregular mutants like the fleas, you know, the drain deminos. They were doing stuff like that throughout the 1980s. And then in 1988, Birkin created the new variant, which is capable of creating a tyrant. But the massive problem with that is there was no host compatibility. Only 1 in every 10 million people had the right genetic makeup to become a tyrant. And that pretty much killed the project for 10 years. Yeah.
10 years ago, Spencer had me assassinated.
Time to die, Doctor.
I will take over your research.
Wesker, Birkin.
Can I go back to T. Veronica? Because I think I just wanted to touch base on Veronica simply because this is the first time where you're introduced to the idea of the T. Veronica virus, and you assume, therefore, it's a variant of. Because, as I said, in the Western world, the idea that there are variants of the T virus are just not known at all. So you get the T Veronica virus, and then you read the file, and the file kind of says, oh, it's a mixture of, you know, queen ant genes or whatever it is. And then it says mixed with the progenitor virus. It doesn't say it's mixed with the T virus, whereas, you know, Japanese people who perhaps read the guides will be aware, well, this makes sense. It's a type of T virus. Whereas I remember going, well, surely it's the T virus mixed with the queen ant genes, but it's not. And so this is the kind of first example in the games where T virus doesn't necessarily mean the T virus that turns people into zombies.
Yeah, it's basically trying to say it's a progenitor variant, which is a T-virus, but because that's not communicated properly for Western audiences, it just leads to massive confusion. I think the files in Code Veronica even refer to the progenitor virus as the mother virus, which goes back to the point Rob was making earlier. I remember when I wrote my very first timeline, I thought the mother virus and progenitor virus were different things. It was that confusing.
Yeah.
I'm trying to even remember the first time I saw clay virus, and then whether or not, how long it took for people to figure out that that was connected and what that was. And I think in the end it was someone reading something from Japan and explaining it or somehow figuring this out, that, and this is in like 1998, 99 maybe.
Yeah.
What this actually was, like the origins, like trying to explain it to people on the internet at that stage.
And then Remake called it the primogenitor virus.
Yeah,
So we had another one.
Yeah, forgot about that too. Yeah, so
there
was years of confusion.
Was that not corrected in the HD remaster?
Oh, I don't know off the top of my head.
I must have to check. I seem to think.
Please do. As I said, I know that the HD version of Zero went back to the old mistake, so who knows?
Maybe not.
Be interesting if they did fix that.
I just want to caveat here by saying if people are wondering like why I seem a little bit lost for words in my responses, it's because John is doing such an outstanding job of summarising this that it's not really leaving a lot left on the table. I sit here in awe at how much you can retain and things like that, and it's just wow.
No, honestly, I'm confused. That's why I'm stuttering, because I can't remember it all as well as I used to be able to.
But the retention is very much there still. It's so impressive.
It is. Well, now we're on to your home straight, Sean, then with the Tyrant. And again, this is, if you were around, was it 2000 or whatever it was when Umbrella Chronicles came about, this changed everything again. 2007. It's changed everything again, and the amount of conversations that Umbrella Chronicles generated exclusively about Sergei and his clones.
Yeah.
And I will hold my hands up, because I was very much one of these people going, oh yes, there's the 10 clones. Well, T001 was one, T002, and then I think it must have been then maybe the original 103. That must have been one, and the TO98 from Dead Aim. That's got to be one. Because again, it kind of read that Sergei came into the fold. John's briefly mentioned that the Tyrant plan was at a standstill because we had this infamous 1 in 10 million compatibility.
Yeah.
And then Sergei comes in and he's compatible, fantastic, 1 in 10 million, I can buy that. And he's cloned 10 times. And then we get, well, we've got the Talos, that's definitely one. We've got the Ivans because they're his brothers. And, and I was listing them all off and it's completely wrong. I was completely out. That's not what happens.
When my country was ruined, I had no place left to call home. Spencer gave me a home and a purpose. I passed the test for becoming a tyrant. I gained my position by allowing them to make 10 clones of me. The tyrants are my brothers, and my brothers and I will issue in a new era for all mankind.
To my knowledge, the clones are just used for research. They don't necessitate to a tyrant scene in the series, do they?
No, you're right, yeah. Sergei donates these 10 clones in exchange for an executive's position with an umbrella, and Birkin spends the next several years extrapolating data on these clones, taking samples, etc. And that's what basically leads to the Epsilon strain T virus in 1998, which of course is what's used to create the T001 and the T002, etc. And the main function of this Epsilon strain virus is it basically gets rid of the compatibility problem. So pretty much anyone can become a tyrant if they're artificially engineered that way, which is kind of helpful in why we see so many tyrants throughout the series rather than all these tyrants just coincidentally being a 1 in 10 million compatible host.
So does the T001 predate Sergei's arrival?
No, so Sergei comes to Umbrella in the early 90s after the fall of the Soviet Union.
Okay.
He gives the clones to Birkin, who works on them throughout the 1990s, because obviously he's busy with the G virus at the same time. We don't actually get a proper date for when the Epsilon strain is perfected, but the T001 and T002 don't come about till 1998. But going back to Wesker's report too, because it's not explained properly, a lot of people, including myself at one point, the way that report reads, you would be forgiven for thinking the T001 was created in 1988.
Yeah.
But no, all the tyrants started from 1998 onwards.
It doesn't help then when, again, you had pre-established law that the T103, Mr. X, was created using the combat data of T002. And yet you've then got the techno-union tyrants, the Ivans, coming out with their disco tech heads pre-Tyrant 103. Yeah. And you're like, oh.
I mean, it's testament to the series that we've covered a lot of sources today and a lot of different, bearing in mind some of these flagship written things all the way up to RE5 where it bolted on lore to existing material. One of the reasons why I think we're still here, and one of the reasons why I feel this series has endured, is because despite the fact that the lore comes from, infamous amount of writers now, all contributing to this ever-weaving narrative, for the most part, it is cohesive and it works. It seems to almost, every time a writer contributes to something, it kind of unbelievably locks in and fills in blanks that another writer has left. It's testament to the series that it's done so well this way, and yet you have the fucking Ivans, which, they crafted and created an entire game, which is Umbrella Chronicles, which goes into how Sergei's contribution to Umbrella and, his donation of his bodies leads to a massive, breakthrough with the Tyrant program. And yet he has these 2 random Tyrant 103s, which have, like you say, futuristic heads-up display, visors, limiter coats and everything, and they shouldn't exist yet.
Not really, no, they shouldn't. It was always a struggle seeing them exist at that point. I didn't have a problem in the Dark Legacy chapters. I thought, why not? But it was just their appearance in Beginnings, and again, he retconned in it was I think it's the TO11, I think Talos was. At least according to the concept artwork, it says TO11 on it. Yeah. That was created at the Arclay facility as well, and that's what needed to come out. I'm going to assume that is one of the clones, but again, you don't know.
T103.
No, it's 011, isn't it? The Talos.
Yeah, but the actual body is the same clone that they use for the T103. I
see. Is that what you... okay, right, okay, fine.
I think what they've tried to do, which again, they just didn't bother explaining at all, is they were obviously creating the Tyrant T001 and T002 simultaneously. Once the virus had taken hold and it looked like it was going to be a success, they then cloned that subject, and that subject was sent to Raccoon City, and that's what spearheaded what was going to be the T103. The T001 developed a fault, so they decided to get rid of that and concentrated on the T002. So you could argue that while the T002 was being worked on, T103 was being worked on in Raccoon City, but they decided to hold off perfecting it until the T002 was ready, and the idea was that T002 was going to have a combat test. They were going to record its combat data, then apply the changes to the T103 and release that. But whatever Sergei had was some kind of prototype that was given solely to him, obviously before those changes could be applied. But again, you're kind of fan-wanking it to make it all work, because there literally is no explanation at all. Sean's right, there shouldn't be there, really. The whole beginnings scenario is one of the biggest lore headaches in the entire series.
But it does confirm that the magic elevator doesn't exist. That's the only thing it's good for.
But if you just look at the sheer ability of like the Ivans versus, and I know some of its gameplay limitations at the time and things like that, but you compare them to how the 103 is depicted in its trenchcoat form in Resident Evil 2 and it's night and day. You know, the Ivans can run, they can jump at superhuman heights and things like that. It's so...
Can they in Beginnings? Or is it just in Dark Legacy that they can do those stupid jumps? I can't remember the fight on the train.
Well, it does leap about the room, yeah.
Does it?
It doesn't necessarily run at you, but I know it does a couple of big leaps that you have to do a headshot to stagger it and stuff like that. Because at one point, Wesker's pinned down and it jumps high in the air and whatnot. But, like, you know, the Ivans are arguably more advanced in their limited form than the 103 is in RE2 when it's on fire, you know.
How does Sheena Island fit into all this? That's the big question, Rob.
Well, it doesn't, because it was changed, Nicholas, to be Nest 2 facility in Requiem City. What are you talking about?
You took the words right out of my mouth, Sean. Except for Ark Thompson lives.
Yeah.
This is the thing, like, we fundamentally have to continue to remember, and you guys have been talking about, is this idea of, like, it is always being constantly built, no matter what translation things haven't come through into the English versions, what things have been missed overall, it's still a continually creative narrative that is expanded where it's needed to in order to justify the weight of its own thing. Like the idea of Birkin in itself, like for example, in his work on the G virus was to create a point of difference in that second game. And then they've been able to create that as an extension of how the T virus elements came around and get his involvement. And then it explains, you know, further about the background of Umbrella and so forth. So, I mean, there's always going to be some levels of inconsistencies and certain things that get changed. And I think that's just fundamentally what happens when you've had a franchise running this long, and that they leave it and come back to it and leave it and come back to it as well. So I think, as you said, Sean, earlier on, it's impressive that it's had quite a level of consistency.
It's impressive that it can be written down and make sense.
Yeah, well, you mentioned Survivor then, Nick. We have to get into the fact that the entire facility in the prison on Sheena Island is to extract this brain fluid that leads to the creation and the ease of compatibility with tyrants.
Yeah, no, that's a lovely segue, because I'm just trying to recall, and you'll probably know it better than I would. At what point does the T103 be deemed to be mass produced? Where was that first documented that that's the successful one?
Well, if you're talking about in series chronology in terms of releases, it's when they are able to successfully extract this brain fluid from humans.
But my point is, no, because I'm just leaning on what John mentioned there, is that we know that there's a T103 in Resident Evil 2 in the labs.
Gotcha.
Yeah, we kind of see there's one in the tube, isn't there? And I'm just trying to think, at what point do we know it's a mass-produced tyrant? I suppose you could argue that in 3, is it? Because you see all the rest of them?
Code Veronica as well, I think, describes the T078 as a mass-produced type.
I was going to say, it depends on what you're meaning, Nick. If it's in a written form, is very different than a visual form, because I would assume you could start to put those narrative beats together already in your head in Resident Evil 2 itself, because you see Mr. X being dropped out of a canister and there's other canisters, which implies they're all the same thing. So already in that alone, you get the idea that they have started to mass produce these things no different than, I know, the mass produced hunters we saw in the first game. So the fact there's multiples of those same things. So I guess it depends on, if you mean as far as first time it appears, it's Resident Evil 2 in game.
Yeah.
But if it's written somewhere, well, that's a different answer.
I'm just trying to think, is there enough time, if we're going on the idea that they create a T-103, but not the one we know, after Sergei clones, and then they wait for the battle data from TO2, so that would be, July 1998? Are we then saying that they basically make Mr. X as a result of that? How does that then tie into, say, having Sheena Island with a Tyrant plant already creating the same Tyrant already? It seems a huge amount of work in a very short period of time.
Well, just imagine that the T001, 002, and the 103, imagine they're all in development simultaneously because they use the same base subject because they're cloned, ironically. They're not Sergei's clones.
Yep.
They're just a clone from the first human they've used. So by the time we get to the mansion incident, the T103 is effectively ready, but they're saying we're not going to start producing it until we've got the combat data from the mansion. So throughout August, they will apply that extra data somehow to refine its control system, and then they will be sent to Sheena Island for production. So you'd be talking sort of September time in the build-up to the Raccoon City incident.
See, it's just, it seems a little tight, that's all.
But again, that's what I was kind of getting at before, Nick, which is that, it's just because we're also still building a narrative. It's tight, but it's because they're thinking of the grander picture, and that doesn't mean everything's going to line up, but it's also that it doesn't unline up. It just is convenient, which is a lot of plotting. Like, this. It's convenience is just a thing that happens sometimes.
I mean, look at Nemesis. Nemesis is a T103 as well. So if they didn't start working on the T103 till after the mansion incident, that means they've somehow created a new Tyrant from scratch and then converted it into a Nemesis in less than 2 months.
That's true. So there must be, the third version, which perhaps we never see, really. This kind of like pre-battle data Tyrant 103 we never see.
But what makes the Hypnos Tyrant unique is it's a different human subject. It's not the original cloned subject that's been the basis for all the previous models.
Not the Hypnos.
And likewise the Thanatos Tyrant. That's obviously an African-American male, a different, unique subject, and that's probably why Greg Muller thinks it's fantastic, because it's not just a copy that comes off an assembly line.
Well, mass production.
Indeed.
Ridiculous. Absolutely. Yeah, okay, so that straightens it out. I only ask because these are questions I've had many times in the past, so I'm assuming some of our listeners might have had the same question. The other question, of course, that I often bug you and pester you over is, if we have this Epsilon strain of T-virus that Birkin has created that turns people into a tyrant, why don't we have tyrants running around Raccoon City? I think you've already answered it. It's because it still turns people into zombies, but it just means if someone is experimented on.
Yeah, you don't just turn into a tyrant magically. You have to have all kinds of different surgeries, and there's some lore in one of the books. I think it's I'm just looking on my shelf. I think it's Research of Biohazard 2 Final Edition goes into quite some detail into how the T103 is created, and it's something to do with you inject the virus into a human. He then has to go into a pod, a bit like Alexia does, and lays in like a certain amount of fluid for a certain amount of time. I'm sure it's all bollocks, but they're trying to explain there's a process behind it. If you just injected with the virus normally, you'll become a zombie. Even if you are compatible to be a tyrant, you'll just become a zombie. There has to be some kind of third-party factor that'll help you become the tyrant. That's why we don't have thousands of them running around Raccoon City.
And that's all been quite nice, but then we've had problems, haven't we, in future games and media. I'm specifically thinking of Jason and the asparagus tyrant that he becomes, as well as Neil.
Yeah, I see what you mean, but then you could argue in Jason's case, for example, he's been infected with the T-virus for 6 years, and he's been taking the inhibitor to stop himself from mutating, so you would have to think, similar to Jill in Resident Evil 5, that she's been infected for so long, he's kind of started to adapt to the virus, and that probably leads to why he naturally becomes a tyrant-esque creature. You could say the same about Jack Norman in Revelations, because we know he was taking the virus to stay alive when he was trapped in underwater.
And for Neil's case, we don't know exactly what was in the thing that Alex Wesker injects Neil with.
Yeah.
It's got Ouroboros in it, and it could have other stuff, and maybe she's perfected something in her own research that became a dead end, but she's like, I can use this as a weapon to help me get rid of a loose end. So it's left vague enough that you could just not question it.
And in the Revelations 2 guidebook, it says Neil Fisher is genetically close to being a perfect Ouroboros match.
Oh, is he? Okay, that's quite handy.
Just to add to that element. So, you don't know exactly what's in that cocktail other than Ouroboros, and if he's an Ouroboros subject and she's perfected other parts of that research and help him become a tyrant, then so be it. Again, it's the convenience element at the end of the day to make an enemy, but it doesn't feel completely unjustified.
I'll tell you what, though, that supplementary material is right there to support all this, isn't it?
It's done a lot of heavy lifting.
And I think this is why the series has survived, because even when the gameplay and the games themselves are failing, that backstory is like no other series. I know some people will probably throw at me like MGS and stuff like that. And don't get me wrong, like the lore in Metal Gear Solid and everything is phenomenal. Kojima created an entire history for that series, but I don't think it's on this kind of level. This is a detailed history on like a scientific level.
Yeah.
It's extraordinary, really.
I think the inherent difference there is that when Kojima was involved in the Metal Gear series, he was tightly controlling the narrative for himself, so it didn't need to be expansive more than he wanted it to be, because it was mostly him and the writers he was working with crafting it. Whereas this has gone and expanded because of how the number of games, the length of time, the number of writers, the intent. I mean, I think that's what I wanted to say earlier on, is that all of this is driven obviously on intent. Like, it's all well and good to say we've got lots of stuff and supplementals and stuff, but it always just comes down to servicing whatever the narrative wants to be. And so I think that's why it's really exciting when they bring back those old elements, when we get connected issues, why we were all excited about the narrative tying of stuff in Resident Evil 5, for example, was much more exciting to us, maybe more so than the gameplay, was because you're like, wow, they're starting to bring these connective tissues back together and actually give us some resolution on some of the things and set up new mysteries about other things. And that's what you always hope for the best with anything in this franchise.
We're going to do a bit of a whistle-stop tour of some of the variants, but before we do, I wanted to very, very briefly just talk about some of the people that have actually bonded with the T-Virus particularly well in this series that gets overlooked. I'm talking, of course, about Axeman, first thing. He's a bit of a unique individual who did bond with the T-Virus, retained his humanity, and despite being infected for what must have been 5 years, 93 I think he was, roaming the forest, still full memory and ability to pass off as a human. And Mary Gray. Now, people may not be aware of Mary Gray. She was in Biohazard the stage, and she also adapted remarkably well to the T-Virus, having been infected, and was able to retain her immense amount of intelligence before eventually succumbing to becoming a very large, big beast thing. There's not a lot of lore on either of these two, other than that they are very close to being perfect adapters of the T-Virus, or, because we don't know what version it was, the general T-Virus.
Yeah, well, to sort of skip ahead, the T-Virus project culminates in Wesker leaking the perfected strain, if you want to call it that, onto the black market after Umbrella's demise. So in Dark Legacy, even though we don't see it in the game, he steals a sample of the Umbrella's latest T-Virus, which has a much faster incubation rate. It's explained in the Umbrella Chronicles novels, and it's actually in deleted dialogue from the game itself, where Wesker says he's going to put it on the black market to cause chaos. And obviously this opens up doors to any organisation who can afford it, really, and that's what basically sparks off this era of bioterrorism where every man and his dog can get hold of the virus and tinker with it and create their own variants.
Yep.
So this goes to some explanation as to how fast the zombies turn in degeneration then?
Yes. I mean, obviously every person's different, so everyone's going to have a different incubation time, but yeah, that's the accepted reason why people turn in seconds rather than days, is because it's this perfected strain. And this is the basis for things like T-Abyss and the T-Virus in Biohazard the Stage, the T-Virus in Death Island, etc., etc.
Soon, Umbrella will be gone forever. They held the power of the T-virus in their hands, but they lacked the proper vision. The true vision of the future. And now, it falls to me to usher in this new future.
Let's kick off then with some of the improvements to the main Epsilon strain. So the first most famous one, I would say, is probably the VACT strain from Resident Evil Remake. And this is one of the few strains that are specifically mentioned in the English version of the archives. It can be easily overlooked, but if you've got a copy of the archives, open it up and it will very clearly tell you that this is a different strain to the normal T virus. And it's always been an interesting point. But the VACT strain was a version that was created from the Crimson Head Elder, the prototype thing in the coffin. He had a unique reaction to the Epsilon strain, which was noted as what we see in the game, and that was extracted from him and experimented upon further within the Arclay facility, and that was what was leaked at the Arclay facility, and not, say, when Queen Leech attacked the train and the management treatment facility. That was just the normal Epsilon strain T virus, but in the mansion it was the VAC strain, which is why Crimson Heads appear only in there.
Yes.
5 points.
The act was an accident as well. It wasn't something Umbrella was trying to engineer. It was just something unique. And I think the only other time it's mentioned in lore is in Darkside Chronicles.
Yes.
Javier Hidalgo purchased that particular strain for the Sacred Snakes, and he had Crimson Heads running round as his guards for his mansion estate. And I appreciate Crimson Heads appear in other games, but I just put that down to purely gameplay reasons. Because we get Lickers and Crimson Heads in Umbrella's End and Operation Raccoon City and Beginnings, as Sean said. And, they shouldn't be there. It should be one or the other.
Okay, so what's the main virus then in Resident Evil 2 and 3 that goes through Raccoon City?
It's the same Epsilon strain. It's just been sort of marginally improved by Birkin, but it doesn't really go into any detail about what those improvements are. People sometimes get confused that the liquor is a result of VACT. So people think it's the VACT strain that leaks in Raccoon City, but Birkin had changed it to, instead of the virus producing Crimson Heads, it would produce liquors, but liquors are produced via an entirely different process. It's all to do with metabolism levels, and we see the zombies that run around or walk around because they're so hungry. They want human flesh to satisfy this hunger they've got. And if a zombie has consumed enough flesh and has a certain energy level, if they're over that particular energy threshold, they will begin to transform into a liquor. But if they're under threshold, they will not. Which is why you see some liquors in Raccoon City, but why not every single zombie is becoming one, if that makes sense. So it's a different process to VACT.
I think we can blame Outbreak for this with the Regis liquor, can't we? Or Regis liquor, whatever you want to call it, because they make a specific intention to make the skin pigment of that liquor boss crimson.
Yeah. It didn't help, no.
No.
But obviously, at some point, Umbrella found this out themselves because, the things like the evolved liquor is very much a BOW, and liquor's one of the few creatures in the game that can appear naturally, but also can be created intentionally as well. So obviously, Umbrella must be able to do that and force it on a human zombie test subject.
Yeah, they spotted a liquor and they thought it was some sort of weird mutation. I think it's described as a wild tyrant. And then they obviously captured one, studied it, and then decided to weaponize it.
So again, that is a long-held discussion over VACs and liquors and Crimson Heads, and it always raises its head every now and again. So something to discuss. The other classic discussion point from the original kind of quadrilogy of games is the Rockfall Island variant, which seemingly brings people back from the dead, and there's been many a forum discussing about this. I think the game makes it very clear that this is a different variant of the T-virus as well, because of the airborne nature of it. And I think, if I remember, I haven't played Code Veronica for a while, I'm sure, Sean, you're probably a bit more attuned to it. But there's the room, isn't there, where I think we can go into the room where I think there's a hunter or sweeper or something like that. And either Claire comments that this must be where the T-virus leaked, and you've got the cabinet, and there's like a destruction and an air vent or something like that. And the confusion's always arisen as to exactly what causes the graveyard zombies to come back or erupt from the ground in true kind of B-horror standard. as Claire happens at the very beginning. Now, is that a dead person being reanimated, or was that a recently buried T-virus zombie that's just coming back because it sensed Claire walking past? That's been a long-held discussion in the community.
We've just reminded me there, talking about that. One of the changes between the mansion strain and the raccoon strain is the raccoon strain was not airborne, because that is explained in the files in Resident Evil 3. The journalist who does his investigation into the cannibal disease, and he says one of the things I have found out is the virus is not airborne, but then in Code Veronica it is again. And weirdly, the answer to this question comes from Capcom's Biohazard Gun Survivor 2 official website, believe it or not.
It answers all your questions, Survivor 2.
It basically explains the graveyard zombies in Code Veronica have been revived from the dead because the new T-virus variant in Code Veronica has extra added influence from the Progenitor Virus. Doesn't go into any more detail than that, and it sort of doesn't really make sense considering the T-virus is part Progenitor anyway, but apparently this is the reason why zombies from that moment on across all titles can revive from the dead. Because another big misconception, which is not explained in the Western localizations at all, is that the zombies in the first several games are not actually dead. They're technically still alive. They're just in a state of living dead, because that's what the T-virus does. It also explains why there's so many bodies in Raccoon City that don't seem to come back, and bodies on the train in Resident Evil 0, for example, why don't they reanimate? And it's because they were already dead, and the virus cannot infect a dead corpse. The virus, it'll infect you, it'll stop your heart, and then it'll revive you. But if you're dead, you cannot be infected, if that makes sense. You have to be infected before you die, otherwise you won't come back.
And I think there's confusion, wasn't there, with the zombies in RE3 coming back?
So they were all buried because people thought they were dead, when in actual fact the virus had just put them in a state of clinical death. So they were all buried, but in reality they were still alive, and the virus brought them back. It's very flimsy considering they've been buried in this cemetery, and it looks like they've been buried for years, when in actual fact they've been buried for a matter of days at most. But yeah, from Code Veronica onwards, the T-virus can infect a long dead corpse and bring it back to life.
Unacceptable! How can you deny it? My base has been destroyed. And thanks to you, the experimental T-virus was released, creating countless zombies and monsters.
John, you've mentioned the perfected variant, the one post Umbrella Chronicles, that presumably at some point Umbrella... I assume Sergei made that during his solitude in the base.
Well, yeah, you could. I mean, again, it's not explained, but following Raccoon City, we get the infamous suspension of business, which crashes the stocks, and that's what basically leads to the demise of Umbrella USA. So Umbrella Europe, which is headed by Sergei, relocates to Russia, and yeah, that's where the perfected strain is clearly made, because that's where Wesker steals it from.
Right, let's move on then to talk about the experimental T-virus, which is the Wesker virus. Now, again, Umbrella Chronicles plays a huge role in this discussion, because no one knew at that point exactly what was Wesker's infection, really. It was all a bit of a mystery. And then there's that one file in the Umbrella Chronicles that mentions Birkin is doing some experiments into, I think he uses the term mutation stocks, implying that it's an old virus that bears no benefit to anyone. Oh, by the way, it can also revive dead people, or dead animals at least, so it might work on you, which always felt really odd.
Yeah, it's very, very vague. I think the Japanese version of that file goes into a bit more detail and explains it can reform dead or destroyed tissue, which probably explains why Wesker's chest has healed over completely by the time he escapes from the mansion. But yeah, there's very, very little detail about what it entails, what it does, and yeah, it's just one of those things. I don't think it'll ever be elaborated on.
But then with Resident Evil 5, you get the kind of retcon, if you like, that Wesker was always kind of a special person, part of the Wesker children, etc. And he has himself very, very nice genetics to be able to potentially survive such a thing. I suppose it's one of those things like Rob was mentioning. It doesn't necessarily contradict, but it doesn't necessarily flow as well as it could, especially with the apparent secrecy of the Wesker children. Oh, by the way, make sure all the Weskers have this random mutated T-virus that we've got in the back cupboard. Password Umbrella.
Because you do have some contradictions. Because like Wesker's report doesn't even name the virus. Well, in the Western version of the actual video you can watch, it's literally narrated as Birkin injected me with the virus in advance. The virus is all it's called. It's not Progenitor because it didn't exist at that point to us. It's not the T virus. It's just the virus in advance. And then when you get to Resident Evil 5, it's almost implied through the text that you read on loading screens and the chronology you can read as an unlockable that there's a person present in every Wesker child's life that has this virus that they will administer one day. And in Wesker's life that we know, it was Birkin. So is it a preordained virus that's given? It's so vague and so nonsense.
We don't really know anything about it other than that.
No.
But we know it seemingly has the same impact on some animals.
Some people within the fandom, and again, I've seen it on these lore-focused Twitter accounts and things like that, name it specifically that Wesker was given the Progenitor. And we know that's not right. That's not accurate.
Not quite, no, because his whole plan was to... Because Ouroboros itself was an attempt to make a newer version of the Progenitor Virus, which even he wasn't completely compatible with.
But this is all going to be up in the air because they're going to cover this in a remake. I imagine there'll be many people within the fandom that are welcome. That it's probably going to get clarified once and for all, which it was. If we hit a Code Veronica remake, they're going to cover it, aren't they? If Wesker's back from the dead as such, but it might not link in with. I think you've said it before, Nick, like if there's any moment that the law is going to break once and for all, it will be with the next remake. Because the games that they're potentially covering, whether it's Code Veronica or Zero, will break the law to a point where you cannot justify it all being one canon anymore.
And we also know that this virus isn't particularly stable. Again, another retcon that was put into Resident Evil 5 because he keeps needing to have the thing, I can't remember what the code is, the inhibitor thing to keep it under wraps, which he didn't need in Code Veronica. It's fine, it's not a big problem, but does that mean that it's not the best virus? And we know as well that virus didn't really cure Alex Wesker's sickness.
Or the virus made her sick.
Or the virus, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Yes, so Alex, as depicted in Revelations 2, the virus essentially did nothing for her or it made her sick. That's basically the angle we're going down. So she never needed any doses of PG67AW or whatever.
Oh, well done.
Is that a question in the quiz, Nick?
No, it wasn't. No, I completely forgot. We've had it before. I just try to remember what the code was. But yeah, I mean, and again, although we're not really touching on this experimental virus, the whole point of a lot of it was to discover this immortality virus, which presumably would have stemmed from, again, going back to the Progenitor, that's what it was trying to do, wasn't it? Make that a possibility for someone as meager as Spencer.
With all this in mind, and we've obviously been talking about the backstory of the T-Virus and everything like that, and you hit the additional Wesker children subplot that 5 introduces and things. Who's the original Wesker?
Don't know.
This is what I mean. It's nonsense, isn't it?
Clive.
As much as we've praised the series for bolting on this additional lore and it being mostly cohesive, like that is a question that I don't think will ever get answered and will probably just disappear forever. I
still think the whole Wesker children thing was the most random, unexpected.
Totally.
Plot point in the entire series. It just came out of nowhere
and frustratingly gone nowhere. As well.
Exactly, yeah.
One day they're going to be like, this was Albert's parents, Gerald and Ward.
I feel it's a bit like in the Tekken series where they keep introducing older generations of the Mishima clan. We started off with Kazuha, then it was Hayachi, and then his dad's somehow still alive with Jinbashi or whatnot. You're like, these people should be dead by now. But yeah, we could still have the original Dr. Wesker turn up and go, it was I all along. Like, okay, fine.
Maybe he's the disfigured guy with the goggles in Requiem.
Oh, we've solved it.
And then
sign and date it, listeners. We've fucking done it. We have. Who is the person who administers Alex's injection then?
Oh, we don't know.
Coronavirus.
We don't know. Possibly herself, because she's in charge of the program then, which again doesn't make sense.
No, and that painting, they don't know each other, but she does. Well, anyway. Right, whistle-stop tour of other variants, just to cover all our bases. The TJCCC-203 is from what game, Robbie?
Fuck if I know. I'm not even fucking sure. What the hell is that?
This is the medicinal strain from Outbreak.
Of course, Outbreak. Yeah, I'd really know that one. Okay, that's
Yeah.
why you asked.
I think I've played Outbreak extensively, and I have no, and that did
Yes.
not ring a single bell in my brain.
Yes, you do. This is the cancer curing one
Okay.
from Flashback.
Is that
So
okay?
It's in the file. Yeah, it's in the file. So this is a slightly different strain that was able to cure Dorothy, albeit for a very short period of time before it all went Pete Tong and she was consumed by a plant. You know, that old chestnut.
That happens to me all the time.
It does. We don't know anything else about it other than it does, in theory, cure them of cancer for a short period of time.
If you wanted to be one of those guys, Nick, you could say, well, Alyssa's been brought back in Requiem for a reason. Maybe the guy in the disfigured mask, maybe it's the Axeman.
Maybe
back
it
to be
is.
the series' true villain.
He's mentioned in Remake 3.
Oh.
Next up is the T. Alexia virus, which you'll know which is obviously from Code Veronica. Now, I remember this is mentioned, the T. Alexia virus, in a file somewhere, and I've always thought that's just nonsense. But it's is
mentioned in a cutscene.
Is it a cutscene as well?
Yeah, it's used in the CVX bolted on ending. Richard Wow specifically mentions the T. Alexia virus to Claire because he's using it to taunt her over the fact that he's retrieved Steve.
Yes,
inside Steve is a living T. Alexia virus.
Yeah, I always put that down as a mistake. I just thought they meant T. Veronica. But I think we're talking about the fact that Alexia's blood, or the version that she has concocted internally, or externally, I suppose, as a result of her hibernation, is different to the T. Veronica virus that is administered to Nosferatu. Is that right, John?
Yeah, because obviously T. Veronica destroys brain cells. So when she puts herself to sleep for 15 years, by the time she comes out, she's totally adapted and bonded with the virus. So she's then synthesized a sample of her own blood and injected it into someone else to see if it would help someone else become compatible, and obviously it didn't.
Not quite, no.
But he does gain an interesting trait that he can revert back to his human form almost perfectly.
Yes.
Is the first fantastical element you could argue in the series.
That point about the 15 years leads nicely onto the next variant, which is a T. Manuela, which I remember when Dark Side Chronicles came out, being pleasantly surprised that they remembered something like that. And Manuela needing regular transfusions, and I'm sure it's mentioned as well whether they need to go to sleep or something for 15 years.
Well, no, they mention that's what she has to do to adapt, but the other way is to have a regular organ transplant.
That's right. Yes, yeah, I know that. Yeah, the kind of 15 years was documented in Dark Side Chronicles, which I thought was a nice touch. So the T. Manuela is again someone who did adapt relatively well. I mean, are we assuming that post Dark Side Chronicles she doesn't need regular organ donation? Is she good after that?
No, I think it's still mentioned that she'll still need the transplants, otherwise she will mutate. She still has to wait 15 years to adapt to the virus, but obviously she's not in cryogenic sleep.
And a nice little post Dark Side Chronicles touch is that the Manuela strain is used in Resident Evil 6, and it explicitly mentioned, is it TO2?
TO2 is like a new variant of T. Veronica. It's basically a detoxified version of T. Veronica.
Okay.
That Carla creates using Manuela's blood, which forms the basis of the C virus, yeah.
Next one is, unfortunately, George would have loved to talk about this. He probably would have discussed about the entire podcast, but nevertheless, the TG virus, which, of course, feeds into the quite excellent and underrated Resident Evil Dead Aim. The idea being that the G virus that Hunk retrieves from Resident Evil 2 is combined with the T virus to create, again, we can discuss a little bit. There's a little bit of confusion about this as well, because, again, the science isn't particularly clear, but I think the files suggest that they wanted to specifically create an electronic field, if you like. It wasn't something that just happened naturally. They didn't just chuck the T virus, G virus. Well, hey, we've got electromagnetism, aren't we great? It was something that they specifically wanted to do, possibly as a result of even like the albinoid, which was able to create some electrical properties, and thought whether it was possible. And you see the fact that it wasn't for a long time with the TO91, and it wasn't until the TO92 was created, or at least theorized, and then they created the TO92 strain that is what Morpheus injects himself with. Wasn't there a confusion a long time ago? For long-term listeners of the podcast might remember that there's discussion about whether it was the T-virus or the T-virus antibodies, or was that just a typographical error in either the localized version?
I think it was background text in the intro.
Is it?
The intro of Dead Aim, where it plays the funky music and there's like a load of scientific scribble in the background. I think it mentions it there. So it went from the T-virus and the G-virus being fused to the T-virus antibody with the G-virus. And I think it's actually the T-virus alongside its antibody and the G-virus. But as to how it all works, fuck knows.
It's still a fan favourite, though. I do particularly like the TO-91 Tyrant. The idea being, of course, this was Umbrella on its knees at this point, and this was one last mainstream programme that they could try and sell on the black market before they got financially crippled because of the stock market crash. I'm guessing they thought, well, if we can add electronic magnetism or electrofield, that'll be a good product to sell, but I don't think anyone bought it. That's why we've not seen it since. Post the end of Umbrella, as you say, perfected T-virus was leaked onto the black market, which gave a lot more freedom in turning into other creations, and the T-Abyss virus is one such product. Now, again, very similar to the T-Veronica virus. That is, in a nutshell, the T-virus combined with something called the Abyss virus, which is a deep-sea virus embedded in fish. Now, you think, John, you have a nice theory that the Abyss virus is almost like the aquatic version of Progenitor, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think so. Even though we're not told much about it, it is described in the files as a naturally occurring virus, and it only happens in extreme deep-sea organisms in very, very extreme pressure zones. So, yeah, it's my headcanon that it's potentially responsible for the evolution of marine life. So you've got the T-virus, which is progenitor-based variants, and the T-Abyss is basically different variants of the Abyss virus, if that makes sense. But again, that's speculation on my part.
Yeah, it's a funny old virus, the T-Abyss. I always enjoyed that kind of example that I think Jack Norman does, doesn't he, with the fish?
The world is in our hands. This is the T-Abyss virus. We're equipped to infect 1/5 of the Earth's waters.
He's turning guppies into jaws.
As much as I like it, I don't think it was as good as it could have been. I think there's a lot, considering like some of the bosses are just like parasites that stuck to a whale, or like the wall blister, which looks a little bit like a hunter. And then, you're going to do something cool like a shark, and you don't. You just make the Scalenamongi things, which are just, again, bigger versions of hunters or something like that. I just think in the enemy design for Revelations, it could have been so much better. Other than like the standard fish, it's something I feel Revelations 1 really missed a trick in having something really cool. Considering the variety of wildlife that they could have done, I thought they were quite subdued myself.
I thought it was quite a unique spin on zombies in terms of what it does to humans.
Yeah.
And another reason why I thought it was like the marine equivalent of Progenitor is because it's got like a 99% lethality rate, which obviously is pretty much the same as Progenitor. But I just liked the effects it had, like, given the appearance of a bloated corpse and how it would try and seek out fluids rather than flesh, and how they became malleable and could sort of squeeze themselves into small spaces and things. I thought it was quite cool, but I do agree. I think, it could have been expanded on a lot more.
The main issue with the T-Abyss, and I think this is ultimately the reason why it is canonically abandoned in the series, is because it is too potent. Because once you start adding abysses to like watercourses and oceans, there really is no going back. That is like a point of no return, isn't it? And I think it's kind of interesting that like even the villains in the series recognise that it is too awful a virus to actually exist, that they all kind of just shelve it.
Yeah, that's exactly right, yeah. Because originally Tricell wanted it to monopolise the marine bioweapons market, because the T-virus is quite shit when it comes to infecting, water-based organisms.
Yes.
But they obviously realised it was far too dangerous, and yeah, as Sean says, they shelved it to stop it from ever leaking onto the black market where anyone could do anything with it and potentially destroy the entire planet.
Another T virus strain is the Howard strain, the T Howard virus, and you're thinking, what on earth is that? Well, that's the Howard strain is named after Howard from the Biohazard the Stage, and you're thinking, well, surely that's just a standard T virus, but it does make the point that the T virus is incorporated with the Irish giant creature, which is a fabled, like a legend, isn't it? A myth that exists, but seemingly it did. And Howard there combined it with the T virus. It's hard to tell from Biohazard Stage what the difference is between the T virus and that version.
Yeah. I mean, the fundamentals of what Biohazard the Stage is makes it difficult to sort of work out what it does, yeah. But I think it's nice that they at least gave us an explanation of why this particular T virus is unique.
Yes, that's right, yeah. Then we've got the Kodaku virus, or the T Kodaku virus, and again, not a well-known one, but that is from Biohazard Heavenly Island, which we've always suggested, do go and check it out. Get past the first bit and have a look. And what's great about it, it kind of combines a lot of the background lore of Survivor again, about taking the genes and survival of the fittest, which was something Vincent Goldman was quite interested in. And the Kodaku is all about doing those experiments, creating BOWs, and then the winning BOW has its then blood taken and then synthesized, if you like, or recombined with other strains. So eventually all the weaker traits of that perhaps existed is removed before you get a stronger version of the T virus. Interestingly, this was originally a Alex Wesker plan before it was taken over by
Dirk Miller.
Dirk Miller, that's who I was thinking of. Yeah, apologies. Nearly there. I was on a roll. I lost it.
Who's clearly modelled on Christopher Walken.
Yes.
Yeah, what's interesting about this is it basically reuses the template that was used in Gun Survivor, where the Hypnos gene was paired with different genes from different things, and they basically had to fight each other until only one survived. And it's a similar principle here. BOWs would fight each other until only one survived. A new sample would be taken from their blood, and then the next round of competitors would be injected, and they'd go again and again and again and again until the ultimate virus was developed. But again, the comic doesn't really tell us what makes this particular virus stand out in terms of what it can do. All we know is that it's worth billions on the black market, according to the spy from Shenyang Pharmaceutical. One drop is worth billions. That's the problem with these later strains that have all been developed after Umbrella's been dismantled. They don't go into enough detail about what they can do. Maybe T Abyss and T Phobos they do to a certain extent, but all these other ones from things like the stage and the comics and even the CG movies, the Alcatraz strain, apart from the way it's transmitted via the nanobots and the fact that it doesn't infect people via bites like previous strains did, we don't really know anything about it.
I mean, go back to the Kodaku, there's a few things. You've got the Schreiber daemon and the subject 001193. They're the results of those experiments and the fight that you mentioned. But then isn't the spy Zilly?
Julie.
Julie, is that how you pronounce it? Not Zilly?
Well, I would say she's just called Julie. I think Zilly is a mistranslation.
Oh, okay. But she turns into something that resembles bloody Queen Alien when she gets infected with it.
As I say,
Why?
It's weird. Just because.
Just because, there we go. We've got the T Phobos as well from Revelations 2, which, as far as I can tell, is almost like a cross between the normal T virus, the Epsilon strain or the perfected strain, but with the slow release, if you like, of the Fear one.
Yeah, it's just a standard T virus. It's not unique in terms of what it does. It's just released into the body depending on the chemicals in your body that react to fear, like noradrenaline and things like that. So if you're frightened out of your wits by something, you'll secrete that chemical internally and your body will be flushed with the virus to the point where you'll just mutate on the spot. But if you can sort of keep your fear in check for as long as possible, then the virus is only sort of coming into your system very, very, very slowly, which in theory gives your body's natural immunity, the chance to fight it off and potentially adapt to it.
Yeah. The final one is the A virus, which is another strain, which is very odd. I mean, they spend a good amount of time in Vendetta, Sean's favourite movie, about the A virus and the trigger virus of the A virus and all that, and the idea that you can get infected but you won't turn only upon when someone said so. That one felt more plot-driven than any of the others.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite complicated in terms of how it works, but this is your infamous T-Virus Las Plagas crossover that everyone kind of wanted.
Yes, that's right, yeah.
Try to remember how this one works. It comes in 3 stages, doesn't it? So you've got the sort of stage 1 virus where it's dormant in your system. So you could be infected with it and not even know. And then stage 2 is the trigger virus, so it needs some kind of external trigger which will set it off. And then the 3rd stage of the virus is actually the vaccine. And the reason Plaga genes were incorporated was because it'll help you control the infectant. And I think it means if you've got the vaccine in your system, it basically means infectants won't attack you, which is why it doesn't attack the likes of Arius and things. You know, the zombies will just walk straight past him.
That's right, yeah. And then there's the enhanced version of the A virus, which was created using blood from Rebecca.
Yeah, because Rebecca had already created her own experimental vaccines, but there was a flaw in her vaccine in that it didn't... Oh, God, what did it do? It was something to do with, even though Rebecca had taken the vaccine and it worked, she was still targeted by the zombies.
It didn't contain the vital genetic components taken from the Plaga parasite.
Yes, that
Your
sounds
words.
good.
It sounds good. You wrote it. Yeah, absolutely. This is where, going back to my lovely headcanon of Resident Evil 0, I like the fact that it's because she was slightly immune to the original T-Virus. That's why it was good. And I will die on that hill.
We'll go with that.
Absolutely go with that. I think that's it, ladies and gentlemen. I think that is all the big T-Virus strains that have existed in the Resident Evil universe. Before we finish, we do have a call-in. So let's hear what Ronnie has to say.
Hey guys, really glad to hear that you're diving into this particular lore topic. I've been deep into researching it myself, especially in the context of the Arclay Labs. I wanted to throw a few ideas into the mix for a discussion. First of all, after Umbrella discovered the Progenitor Virus in the 60s, they basically started injecting it into anything that moved, and for decades they got absolutely nowhere. The Arclay team was spinning its wheels, Umbrella as a company was making money from regular medicine, but scientifically on the Progenitor they were stuck. Secondly, I think the idea that Umbrella scientists were these brilliant masterminds behind the T-Virus is a total myth. It wasn't any sort of genius, it was blind luck. Marcus only got results when he injected the Progenitor Virus into leeches, and even that came down to chance because he'd already injected it into everything else. Up until then, they were just testing whatever was left on the list. Now here's where my main theory comes in. I think Spencer already had what he wanted long before the T-Virus. He and Dr. Wesker developed what I believe was the so-called experimental virus, something derived from Progenitor but not the same as T-Virus. The Wesker Children Project was all about finding people who could survive Progenitor exposure, essentially searching for the gods of Spencer's eugenics obsession, not test subjects for T-Virus. He was rich and just got richer through Umbrella's commercial arm. He had more than enough money to spare to throw at the T-Virus for fun, basically. I'll quote Wesker himself here. Spencer's extreme investment in BOWs seemed unnecessary. Why would Spencer need such BOWs in the first place? And I think Wesker was right. It was unnecessary and he didn't need BOWs. Why would he need a Tyrant when he has a Wesker? And what usefulness really is the Nemesis when he had someone like Albert Wesker? And that leads to my last point. I don't think Spencer ever pushed the T-Virus project in earnest because he didn't need to. He'd already achieved his goal through Dr. Wesker, the screening and the experimental virus. Competitiveness against the other labs was his biggest motivator with T-Virus research. So the T-Virus was just a sideshow that got out of hand. Marcus, the Ashfords and Birkin were the only ones who really cared about taking it further, and they were personal goals, not Spencer's goals. So my overall thought for discussion is this. Umbrella wasn't a company of brilliant minds. They were more like Wayland Yutani from Alien. They were greedy, reckless and lucky enough to stumble into T-Virus breakthroughs through accident. They didn't discover Progenitor, they just exploited and farmed it. Marcus found the T-Virus because he was just desperate. Birkin built on other people's work and the world paid the price. So what do you guys think? Was the T-Virus the dream of select scientists but not Spencer?
Thank you, Ronnie. That's 2.5 hours condensed down into less than 3 minutes. Interesting comments, though. Thoughts?
Yeah, I'm not sure personally. I mean, I think, for one thing, the experimental virus used by the Wesker children, that's not something that was developed prior to the T-Virus. That is a T-Virus. I would guess the experimental virus used on the Wesker children wasn't developed until the late 80s, early 90s. You know, they were all given this virus as adults, not children. And Spencer thought the T-Virus project was massively important because that was the whole point of it, was to create this neutered version of Progenitor that was going to make him a god. You know, creating BOWs was a secondary objective. That was just to fund the ongoing research. That's why they needed Umbrella. You know, nobody knew Albert Wesker was genetically special until he took this virus, which wasn't until 1998. And Spencer was very clever. He knew Marcus was going to make the breakthrough in the T-Virus project. This is documented in archives too. He just sat back and waited until Marcus developed the T-Virus, and then he took it for himself. And as for just blind luck with the leeches, it's not necessarily desperation. The leeches were purposefully picked because of their single-minded nature. Their body structure theoretically made combination with the T-Virus easy. They just exist to feed on tissue. So, you know, the leech thing, he didn't just experiment on leeches for a laugh. You know, there was some thinking behind it. Yes, granted, it took him nearly a decade to get there, but it wasn't just blind luck. I think Ronnie's right in the sense that, yes, Umbrella are greedy, yes, they rode the luck from time to times, but they do have those genius individuals which got them further and pushed them further. It was Spencer's belief that Progenitor existed. Everyone else just thought it was a legend. He's the one who pushed it. And the reason he kept throwing money at the T-Virus project, which was pointless in Wesker's eyes, was because Wesker didn't know his motivations at the time. He wanted a virus that would infect all of humanity. But the T-Virus was never going to have a success rate higher than 90%. But if you've got a virus that's 90% successful and can create bioweapons, why would you want to take it any further? That's what Wesker couldn't understand, and that's what begins his whole quest of trying to uncover Spencer's motivations over the next 20 years.
Rob?
The only comment I've got is something that I've always had an inherent, not misunderstanding, but something that I've always had to question in lore is that it's not because I don't see an answer, I do, but it's just one of those ones where it's fundamentally has made no sense. That kind of is exemplified by one of these comments on the recording, which is the Umbrella organization as a company is making a lot of money as an upfront pharmaceuticals company. And I understand the intent of the virus research has a behind the scenes thing, but I've never understood the importance of the bioweapon element in the sense other than potential profits. But it's a bit of a misnomer because if you create these things, who are you selling them to? Are you selling them to different sides? And then does that just lead to a mutual destruction element, which becomes moot because you have no one left to sell to? It's one of the elements that makes me laugh, particularly about the fifth Anderson movie, because it inherently comes to this crux exactly in that film about this idea of mass-produced bioweapons that were being sold to various nations. And it's like, well, if you create them so perfectly, they will eventually kill everyone and you'll have no one left to sell to, thus undercutting your point of why you're even making them. Whereas obviously there's a better intent for the virus, there's a better intent for pharmaceuticals, but there isn't for bioweapons. And so that's the one element of the entire franchise I've always been like, I see why, but I don't understand the underpinnings other than profit, and eventually that's going to run out.
It's documented that the US government were Umbrella's first customers, and these bioweapons were being created for them because they eventually thought that's how warfare was going to evolve. It was going to change from conventional weaponry to sort of biological weaponry.
I think it's probably one of the best bits of Resident Evil 6, especially the Edonia levels, is that you actually do finally get to see what a war zone is like, and a damnation as well.
And inherently this is where the real-world comparison is essentially like nuclear weapons, where you lead to a point of these things are quite uncontrollable to a certain degree, and if people start unleashing them, they lead to a mutually led destruction kind of thing. And it's funny because it's never gotten to that bad point in the game franchise, but honestly, one of the plot points in that movie was where I realized, yeah, if the game narrative went down this path, it would just end up being ridiculous. And so I'm glad that the game's never gotten to that point.
Well, thank you, Ronnie, for that call in. Always interesting. I hope you had your question answered as well. That does finish our deep dive into our T-Virus special. We hope everyone has enjoyed it, learned something maybe. I don't know. You know, it's we certainly covered a lot of points of the history of the series here, and hopefully people, you know, will think next time when, I don't know, a new T-Virus comes along that, you know, perhaps we can follow a kind of chain of causation as to exactly which T-Virus this is, and, you know, lead to more curiosity, because it's something that a lot of these newer games, a lot of the lore is now hidden in like gun pamphlets and things like that, which is a big shame. So If there's more of a push for explanation, the better, I say, because I think the more people push to know more about it and not just have it as a gameplay mechanic, I think that's an inherently good thing. That finishes that discussion. We have time, of course, for Neptune's Biohazard Quiz.
The ultimate test of Resident Evil knowledge returns. 100 podcasts later.
Jesus Christ. What question is that?
I'm getting a big fat 0 this week.
Yeah, I'm not going to get any of these.
I'm not going to say anything because I know that you'll just change the answer or something. Like, you don't even know what the answers are.
Can I just ask, have you had all of these questions independently verified?
And still things don't quite go to plan.
You only have to probably get it right.
Welcome to Neptune's Biohazard Quiz. Batman. Star Tyrants. George Trevor. Robbie McGregor. Mr. Spencer. Neptune's Biohazard Quiz.
Welcome, one and all. We've got 5 new questions. You can clear your desktops and open up Notepad. Here we go. Question number 1 comes in from Jordan Osiris. In Resident Evil Code Veronica, what temperature do you need to set the cabinet to unlock the Clement E? Points will be available for closeness to the answer. Question number 2. In the original Resident Evil 2, where do you find the 2 halves of the Jaguar Stone? Oh, you know this. Question number 3. What is the prominent colour of the crew quarters key found on the Queen Zenobia? Question number 4. Playing as Jill in Resident Evil Remake and when you're rescuing Chris, what other item can you pick up in the cell? And finally, a timeline question. Well, of course we have to have a timeline question. Tomorrow is the 16th of November. What facility shuts down on this day in 1998? They're the 5 questions. Join us after this one. We'll run through those answers. Welcome back to Neptune's Biohazard Quiz. I thought they were okay questions. I thought we, I've criticised sometimes for having ridiculous ones. I thought these were in the middle, middling.
You've not given me enough time on the Jaguar Stone one.
That's okay.
Still trying to rack my brain through that.
Question number 1 was, in Code Veronica, what temperature do you need to set the cabinet to unlock the Clement E? Batman, we'll start with you.
I had 12.8 degrees.
12.8 degrees. Romby, what did you have?
I just had 12.
12. Stars Tyrant, what did you have?
12.6.
12.6. The answer is 12.8. Point to Batman.
I don't even know how I know that. It's just like...
I give up. I'm done. That is one of those questions that I'm so sure I know the answer that if I'm wrong, I question everything I know about this series, and that's it. That's my moment. I'm done.
Is that it? We're done. We're done.
Yeah, Pookie quiz. I'm done.
I honestly had no idea if it had a point something on it, and I was just like, I know it's 12. It's probably 12 something. I'm like, so I'm just going with 12. And as soon as I heard 12.8, I was like, probably is that. I'll stick with what I wrote.
But do you not find, though, there's certain puzzles throughout the series with these weird, obscure answers that you just remember off the top of your head?
NTC 0394.
Yeah, that's a good one.
4231. The coil.
Absolutely. I'm giving a full point to Batman, but I'm giving half points to Stars and Rob for getting very, very close, because that's not.
I don't want your point. I don't want your charity, Nick.
Now I'm getting.
Just tell me I suck, and I'll be happy with that.
Call yourself a fan. 0.2 of a degree out. What are you... Oh dear. In question number 2, in the original Resident Evil 2, where do you find the two halves of the Jaguar Stone, Romby?
I honestly am struggling. I feel like one of them's definitely in the art gallery storage room where the liquor crashes through the window. The statue there.
Okay.
I'm sure. I can't remember the other one at all. Honestly, I'm drawing such a blank. So yeah, that's only got a half an answer. Sorry.
Half an answer. Could be worth half a point. Batman.
I might have to hand my Resident Evil card in, but I can't even remember what the Jaguar Stone is.
It's the one they use for the art, the thing behind Iron's desk. That part I remember.
Oh yeah, and one of them split in two. Is that what you mean?
Yes.
Oh fuck. I don't know. Sorry.
Don't know.
No.
Stars Tyrant.
I'm going to say one is in the, do you want to call it the gallery room, where the Tyrant bursts through the wall, where you have to light the 3 torches and the furnace.
Right.
No, because a cog dropped out the wall there. Yeah, so the clock tower, I'm going to say one half.
Yep.
And you see, I'm doing this in real time. Yeah, so the clock tower in remakes, in OG2, and I can't even remember where you get the other stones from. It's too late in the evening. It's gone 11 o'clock when we're recording, ladies and gentlemen. We're done. We're tired.
I need an answer. I need a room.
So annoyed at myself because I think I've remembered the other one.
Pass. I can't think of another room. I was total blank. I do apologise, everybody. We suck.
Well, between you both, Rob and Stars, you got the correct answer. It's the gallery, the Virgin Heart room, I've called it. And yeah, and I'm going to be very gentle. The cog room up in the clock tower.
Third floor clock tower.
Yeah.
Fuck. I remember it now. You put the gold clock tower cog in place.
I knew it was one of the final pieces you get, because in Leon A, once you collect the last chess piece, you can use the chute.
Yes.
To get down back to the basement, which is not offered on any other variant, I think.
Oh, interesting. Well done. Well done. Question number 3 is, what is the prominent colour of the crew quarters key found on the Queen Zenobia? We'll start with you for this one.
I had no idea. I went with blue.
Blue. Batman?
I'm going to say red.
Red. Romby?
Orange. I have no idea.
Orange. No. Purple. Purple was the answer and the colour we were looking for there, ladies and gentlemen. So no points. It's a prominently purple colour. Question 4. Surely points here. Playing as Jill in Remake, when you rescue Chris, what other item can you pick up in his cell? Romby?
I'm going to say green herb.
Green herb. Batman?
I'm going to say a box of shotgun shells.
Box of shotgun shells. Stars Siren?
I can confidently say, in all my years of playing the remake, I never even knew there was a collectible item you could get in the cell, so I'm just going to go on a limb and say, is it a fucking ink ribbon?
Points to Batman. It is shotgun shells.
God.
It is, yes. You pick up some shotgun shells just when you need them as well.
Why has Chris got shotgun shells with them in the cell?
I don't know. And finally, question number 5 was the timeline question. So tomorrow is the 16th of November. What facility shuts down on this day in 1998? Romby, did you know?
I was thinking it might be something to do with Survivor, given the date. And so I was just like, was it the Shino Island one? But I had no idea otherwise, so that's my guess.
Stars Siren?
I had no idea. I'll say the restaurant on Sheena Island.
Batman?
Umbrella Africa.
Correct, yes. The African Research Centre from Resident Evil 5. You can see how I put it in because we had talked about it a little bit with Progenitor.
Yeah, it makes it all better for me being useless, Nick. Thanks.
Let's have a look at those scores. Well, I shouldn't say we would do well because, unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, it has not been a high-scoring round. With this podcast winner being Batman with 3 out of 5. Congratulations.
Hey.
Yeah. And in joint second place with the solitary point, Stars Tyrant and Romby. Well done. That does finish Neptune's quiz. Join us next time where we'll have some more questions. So we are coming towards the end of our T-Virus special. We hope everyone has enjoyed it. Coming up next, we are going to be doing a follow-up to our well-received podcast where we looked at Resident Evil 1, 2, 3 and its influences. If you remember, I can't remember what podcast number it was, but we looked back on some of the games that the original trilogy inspired, recommendations, obscure survival horror games, and a lot of people found that quite interesting. And because Resident Evil 4 was so... Sorry for keeping you up, John.
Sorry.
He's had a long day.
So...
Apologies.
That was loud.
I thought I was on mute, sorry.
It's so good. So good.
Resident Evil 4 was obviously, we've been celebrating all year, really, with its 20th anniversary. And, of course, Resident Evil 4 redefined the survival horror landscape once again, just as the original trilogy did so. So we're going to follow that up with what games were inspired by Resident Evil 4. And there is, of course, no shortage of them. But, like I was in the original podcast, I'm going in not being a massive gamer at this point in my life, so I'm going to be learning just as you guys are when we touch upon all the influences and what other games you might want to pick up. Blue Dead Space, that's a good one. There we go. That's about the extent of my knowledge, so I am very much looking forward to going through that with everyone who is far more knowledgeable about video games as a whole. But I'd like to thank everyone for listening to our T-Virus special. It is goodbye from me, Neptune.
Goodbye from me, Batman.
Goodbye from me, Stars Tyrant.
Goodbye from me, Robbie.